Chapter 175. Go to watch net. The Kathuo monastery was very quiet late at night. The voices of Li Yunyang, Changbajila, and Meiduo attracted the attention of the lamas guarding the monastery. Two patrolling lamas carrying lanterns spotted them and shouted, "Who's there?" The two lamas spoke in Tibetan. Changbajila also replied in Tibetan, "It's me, Chiangba, a friend of Abbot Damba. Watch net. 7 km. The two lamas walked closer with lanterns in their hands and immediately laughed. "Changbajila, it's you. What are you doing here so late at night? Hey Meiduo, you're here too?" Meiduo greeted the two young lamas with a smile. The two lamas looked at Li Yundong in confusion and asked, "Who is this? What is he doing here so late?" Changbajila smiled and said, "This is my savior." One of the slightly taller young lamas laughed. I know. I've heard about this. Changbajila, is he the living Buddha of the Han family who saved you from Elysium? It doesn't look like it. Changbajila chuckled and said, "Buddha said that all living beings are equal. People can't be judged by their nobility or their appearance. Mima, don't look at him like this. He's very powerful." The young lama called Mima laughed and said, "Of course I don't have the ability to bring the dead back to life." Li Yundong saw that they had been talking in Tibetan, and he couldn't understand a word, so he couldn't help asking Meiduo, "What are you talking about?" Meiduo smiled and said, "We are talking about you. Mima and Pucheong don't believe that you saved Changbagra." Li Yundong smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. As long as they don't blame me for breaking into the temple in the middle of the night." Who would have thought that Mima could understand Mandarin? "Did you barge into the temple on your own?" he asked in Mandarin. Li Yundong thought to himself, F***ck. Why would I send myself to the muzzle of a gun for no reason? Could these two lamas understand Mandarin? He groaned inwardly, but he forced himself to nod and said, "Actually, I've been staying in the temple and haven't gone out, so it can't be considered trespassing." Watch net. Rainbow * literature _learning %super #fast. Update. Another lama, Pucheong, who had been silent all this while, also said in stiff Mandarin, "You can't spend the night in Kathuo monastery without permission." Li Yundong knew that it was his fault, so he didn't embarrass the two lamas. He nodded and said, "Well, I'll leave in a while." Changbajila was shocked and hurriedly stopped Li Yundong, who was about to leave. He said sincerely, "Han brother, you are my savior. We Tibetans have no reason to drive our benefactor away. This is ungrateful. Wait here for a moment. The abbot, Damba, is a good friend of mine. I'll go talk to him. You can definitely stay here for the night." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Changbajila, it doesn't matter. I'm going to hurry through the night." Changbajila opened his hands to stop Li Yundong from going over. He said, "Han boy, you insist on leaving. Aren't you making me feel bad? In the future, if others know that I can't even repay my savior, what will they think of me?" Meiduo also tried to persuade him. "Yes, Han brother, although you didn't get lost after a long journey, this plateau is not like the inland. There are roads and signs everywhere. It's easy to get lost on the plateau here. You'd better wait until dawn and go with us." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He secretly felt that Meiduo's words made sense, so he couldn't help but ponder. Seeing that he was tempted, Changbajila hurriedly said, "I'll go find the abbot. Han brother, wait here. You must wait for my news." As he spoke, he winked at Meiduo, indicating that she must stop Li Yundong and not let him go. Meiduo nodded gently to show that she understood. Only then did Changbajila feel relieved. He waved to Mima and Pucheong and said, "You two take me to see Abbot Damba. Hurry up." The two young lamas glanced at Li Yundong and hesitated, but they couldn't resist Changbajila's urging, so they turned around and left with the old man. Go to watch net. 7 km. Meiduo watched them leave and said with a smile, "Brother Han, don't worry. Changbajila and Abbot Damba have a very good relationship. When they were young they became sworn brothers." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm not worried. If it comes down to it, I can sleep outside for a night. Anyway, that's how I've been doing for the past month." Meiduo involuntarily looked at Li Yundong's bare feet and said, "Brother Han, did you walk all the way here on your feet? Where did you come from?" Li Yundong looked at her and smiled. "Have you heard of Tianan City?" Meiduo exclaimed, "I know. This is a very, very far city. It's more than 2,000 kilometers away." Li Yundong was a little surprised. "You know Tianan City?" Meiduo smiled proudly and said, "I'm very good at geography. I've always been in the top 3 in all my subjects in school. Don't look down on me." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I wouldn't dare. You're much better than me." Meiduo giggled. She opened her mouth to speak, but suddenly found that she couldn't find a topic to talk about. She rolled her eyes and asked again, "Well, Brother Han, can you tell me how old you are? You must be working already, right?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm still in college. I'm only 20 years old." Meiduo said in surprise, "Really? You seem to be in your 30s. I didn't expect you to be only 2 years older than me. Are you a college student?" I'm also going to take the college entrance exam next year." Li Yundong smiled and followed her topic of conversation. "Which university do you want to go to?" Meiduo had long had her favorite university in mind, but she suddenly rolled her eyes and said slyly, "I don't know yet. By the way, Brother Han, which university are you going to?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Tiannan University, just a third-rate university. It's not worth mentioning." Meiduo didn't know that Li Yundong was telling the truth. She knew that Han people had always been modest and introverted, so she thought that Li Yundong was being modest. She smiled and said, "How about I go to your university?" As she spoke, her heart suddenly began to beat wildly. Her ears turned red, and although there was shyness in the corners of her eyes, her gaze was burning and extremely bold. Li Yundong didn't notice Meiduo's gaze, nor did he notice that Meiduo's words were actually a kind of hidden test. He laughed and said, "Didn't I say that this school is not good? You are so excellent. If you go there, wouldn't it be a waste of talent?" Meiduo was stunned. She didn't know what Li Yundong meant by this. Was he rejecting her or did he mean something else? She thought for a long time and felt that his words were neither a promise nor a refusal. She was unwilling to give up. She opened her mouth and wanted to test him again, but she was really a little shy in her heart. She couldn't open her mouth no matter how hard she tried. A 17-year-old Tibetan girl was facing a 20-year-old Han man in the middle of the night. Her heart was in a mess. After struggling for a long time, Meiduo couldn't help but complain in her heart. No wonder people say that Han people have a lot of tricks in their hearts. Today I see that it's really true. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. How annoying. Li Yundong didn't know that the little girl had already complained in his heart. He saw that Meiduo had lowered her head and was silent for a while, so he didn't take the initiative to talk to her. He just sighed in his heart, "This girl is really like Su Chan. I wonder where she is now and what she is doing? Is she thinking about me?" When Meiduo saw that Li Yundong didn't take the initiative to talk to her, she felt even more resentful in her heart. "There are so many young men who come to talk to me on weekdays. Why is this Han brother so arrogant that he doesn't even want to take the initiative to talk to me?" Meiduo felt a little embarrassed and wanted to leave, but her feet seemed to be rooted to the ground and she didn't move at all. While the two of them were talking to each other, Changbajila found the backyard of the temple, where Abbot Damba lived. Before he entered the room he shouted, "Damba, are you asleep? If you are, get up quickly." As he said this he turned to Mima and Pu Chiong and said, "All right, it's none of your business. You can go first." Mima and Pu Chiong were supposed to lead the way for Changbajila, but as the three of them walked, Changbajila's pace became faster and faster. The old horse knew the way, so it didn't take long for him to walk ahead of them. Mima and Pu Chiong looked at each other, smiled bitterly, shook their heads and left. Not long after, the wooden door creaked open, and an old man wearing a red frock and a yellow cassock walked out. The old man's eyebrows were very long, and his face was full of wrinkles. As soon as he saw Changbajila, he couldn't help sighing and saying, "Chiangba, it's so late. What are you making a fuss about here? Aren't you afraid of disturbing Buddha?" Changbajila was shocked. He first bowed respectfully to the position of Buddha in the temple, then anxiously pulled Damba's arm and said, "I have something urgent to talk to you about." Damba smiled bitterly and said, "Why haven't you changed your impatience after decades? What is it?" As soon as Changbajila told him what had happened, Damba laughed and said, "It turns out that you have found your savior. Where is he? Take me to see him quickly. I also want to see what the master who can pull you back from the Elysium looks like." As he spoke, he was about to leave, even more anxious than Changbajila. However, Changbajila grabbed Damba's arm and refused to let him go. He said, "No, you have to promise me first that he will stay here for the night." Damba smiled and said, "Is this a thing? I promise, I promise." As he spoke, he was about to leave again, but Changbajila pulled him back again and said, "Don't worry, I still have something to tell you." Damba smiled bitterly and said, "What else?" Changbajila said seriously, "This Han man saved my life. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have been able to complete this pilgrimage. But I don't have anything to thank him with, so I want to borrow something from you." Damba immediately became vigilant. "What do you want to borrow?" Changbajila said, the Mahamudra Secret Sutra, /om/. Chapter 176. Go to watch net. As soon as Damba heard that Changbajila wanted to borrow the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra, he immediately shook his head like a rattle. No, how is this borrowing? It's clear that you won't return it. Besides, how can such an important thing be passed on to an outsider? Changbajila said unhappily, Damba, you promised to give me a copy last time. Why are you going back on your word now? Just take it as giving me what you promised to give me in advance. You don't have to worry about who I give it to. Damba still shook his head. No, this Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra is the most precious treasure of the Kathuo Monastery. It can't be passed down to the Han people. Go to watch net. Changbajila sneered. Damba, are you bullying me as an outsider? Do you think I don't know that you have printed a lot of Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra and are selling them as souvenirs? Damba's face was slightly red, but he couldn't see it clearly in the dark. He argued, that's an incomplete copy. Even if it gets out, it's not a big deal. No one can understand anything from this incomplete copy. Changbajila said, yes, you yourself said that it's an incomplete copy, and outsiders can't understand it. But even if you give me an original copy without the teachings of a master, how can outsiders really learn the kung fu of Mahamudra? This Han man saved my life by chance. If I can't even take out a decent gift, what will others say about me if it gets out in the future? Damba hesitated. He thought for a moment, then sighed and said, wait here for a moment. Changbajila was overjoyed. Okay, I'll wait for you here. After a while, Damba came out of the house with a beautifully wrapped book as thick as a pinky finger. He handed it over and said, here you are. Changbajila took it, flipped through a few pages and suddenly became furious. He raised his head and said angrily, Damba, I treated you as my best friend in vain. How dare you fool me with an incomplete copy of a souvenir? As he spoke, Changbajila threw the book to the ground and shouted, from now on, you are no longer my friend. Seeing that he was about to leave angrily, Damba hurriedly pulled him back and sighed, hey, don't be in such a hurry, I want to give you this book. Changbajila saw him take out a thread-bound book with a yellowish cover. He took it and flipped through a few pages. His face lit up with joy. That's it. Ah, Damba, thank you very much. Damba sighed, forget it as long as you don't scold me. As he spoke, he squatted down, picked up the remnant book on the ground and patted the dust off it. Changbajila was in a good mood, so he joked, why are you still boasting so cleanly? Aren't these books everywhere in your temple? Damba snorted. If you don't become the abbot, you won't know how much the monastery consumes. This book can still be sold. Changbajila smiled and shook his head. You really only care about money. By the way, aren't you going to see that Han guy with me? Are you leaving now? Damba had been forced by Changbajila to take away an extremely precious esoteric canon. At this time he was depressed, and even his desire to see Li Yundong had diminished a lot. He said listlessly, lead the way. I'll go and have a look. Let's go. Changbajila laughed and carefully hid the book in his chest, then strode forward to lead the way. He walked as fast as he could and his health surprised Damba. I know about Changbajila's health. Last year he was sick. How did he become so healthy all of a sudden? Changbajila was afraid that Meduo wouldn't be able to stop Li Yundong, so he couldn't help but walk faster and faster. In the end he was almost jogging. Although Damba was about the same age as him, he hadn't been soaked in Li Yundong's vigorous Yuanyang genuine qi, so he couldn't keep up with him. He could only keep shouting at Changbajila to slow down. After walking for a few minutes, Changbajila finally saw Li Yundong at a glance. He laughed happily from a distance and said, Han guy, I'm here. When Li Yundong saw him he also smiled. Meduo was sulking because Li Yundong hadn't talked to her. As soon as she saw Changbajila, she smiled happily and greeted him. Changbajila, have you finished talking? As she spoke, she unconsciously looked behind him and was suddenly stunned. Abbot Damba, why are you here? Abbot Damba was panting as he walked. He smiled and said, I came to see Changba's savior. Is that him? Damba looked at Li Yundong and Meduo nodded with a smile. Yes, it's him. Damba was shocked when he saw him. He thought to himself, this Han man's eyes are bright and sharp like a knife. Moreover, the power he exudes is no weaker than that of the guardian of the holy mountain. He's not an ordinary person. He's clearly a cultivator. I thought he was just an ordinary person who was proficient in medicine. I didn't think he could understand the cultivation book of the esoteric sect, so I agreed. Why did Xiangba want to give him the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra? Nonsense, it's really nonsense. But he had already promised to give the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra to Xiangba, so it was not appropriate for him to ask for it back. He could only hope that Li Yundong would refuse so that he could ask for it back. Go to the internet. Changbajila didn't know what Damba was thinking. He walked up to Li Yundong and enthusiastically introduced them to each other. This is my good friend, Master Damba, the abbot of the Kathuo Temple. Damba, this is my savior, Li Yundong. Li Yundong nodded with a smile, and Damba also forced a smile and put his palms together in return. Changbajila took out the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra from his bosom and respectfully handed it to Li Yundong with both hands. He said seriously, Han boy, this is a little token of my appreciation. Please accept it. Li Yundong was stunned. He saw that it was a thread-bound book with a Buddha statue on the cover and a line of golden Sanskrit characters. He muttered in his heart, what is this? Should I accept it? Isn't it popular among Tibetans to give hada? Meduo, who was standing to one side, saw his hesitation and advised, Han brother, just accept it. You saved Changbajila's life, so it's not a big deal to accept this little gift. If you don't accept it, Changbajila will be very sad. Li Yundong glanced at her and felt that it might not be a precious gift, so he nodded with a smile and accepted it. Damba was going crazy watching from the side. He wanted to beat his chest and stamp his feet. Meduo, why are you so talkative? Do you know what that is? Seeing Li Yundong accept it, Damba stuffed it into his bosom without looking at it, looking as if he didn't take it seriously. He was even more resentful in his heart. This kind of esoteric method is hard to get, but you actually treat it as weeds on the side of the road and don't take it seriously at all. Damn it. But on second thought he thought, well, since you don't take it seriously, that's even better. When I find a chance to take it back, you won't be very sad. Damba made up his mind. He smiled and chatted with Li Yundong for a while, then found an opportunity to say goodbye and returned to his room. After returning to his room, Damba called over a patrolling lama who had passed by the house and said, go and get Dorji Tenzin for me. The lama nodded and turned to leave. After a while, a tall monk dressed in a yellow and red lama robe strode in. The monk's robe exposed his left hand, where the muscles were bulging, and his skin glowed like steel under the moonlight. The village chief's hair grew on his head, each strand like a steel nail. He had tiger eyes and a lion's nose, and his appearance was extremely fierce. When Dorji Tenzin saw Damba, who was 2 heads shorter than him, he bowed respectfully and said, Abbot Damba, what can I do for you? Damba told him the whole story, sighed and said, I thought that he was just a Han man who was proficient in medicine. I thought that even if I gave him the book, he wouldn't be able to understand it. But I never expected that this person would turn out to be a cultivator from the Central Plains. If such a person gets the book of our esoteric sect, he must be like a fish in water, like a tiger with wings. This is a big deal, and it may endanger the safety of our esoteric sect in the future. Dorji Tenzin raised his head and asked, Abbot Damba, do you want me to kill that person? Damba quickly shook his head and said, No, we are all monks. How can we commit such a sin that will send us to hell? I'm also at fault in this matter. I shouldn't have agreed to Changba's request. Just help me get this book back. Dorji Tenzin nodded. There was no expression on his face and his eyebrows were as deep as the sea. He didn't ask about the strength of his opponent, so he nodded and said, Okay, I understand. As he spoke, he turned around and was about to leave. Damba hurriedly stopped him and warned, Don't act rashly. You must wait until he is separated from Changba and the others. You must not let Changba know. Do you understand? Dorji Tenzin nodded, but Damba still felt a little worried. He said, By the way, although you are the guardian of our Kathuo monastery and one of the 18 guardian Vajras of the Holy Mountain, don't underestimate your opponent. Don't kill him, don't hurt him. Just take the scripture back. If he is willing to return it himself, that will be even better. Do you understand? Dorji Tenzin frowned slightly and asked, What if he refuses? Damba sighed and said, If he refuses, then we can only rob him. Dorji Tenzin nodded and said, I understand. Abbot Damba, is there anything else? If not, I'll leave first. Damba smiled and said, Go and have a rest. It's all right. When the night passed, Damba woke up. He wanted to ask Changbajila about the route of their pilgrimage, but when he arrived at the residence of Changbajila and the others, he found that they had set off early in the morning before the sky had even brightened. Damba was about to ask the lama next to him to find Dorji Tenzin and ask him to catch up with them quickly, but he suddenly found that the lamas in the temple were pointing at a stone that was as tall as a person next to the temple. Some tourists who had come to burn incense early in the morning were constantly marveling at the stone, and some were even scrambling to take pictures next to it. Damba walked over curiously and asked, "What are you looking at?" One of the lamas turned around and saw that it was Abbot Damba. He immediately saluted and said, "Abbot Damba, come and see, it's so strange here." Damba took a look and saw that the stone, which was carved with scriptures, had a clear fist mark, and the outline of the fist was as clear as if it had been cut by a machine. Damba sucked in a breath of cold air. "Who did this?" A lama said, "I don't know. I passed by here yesterday evening when the temple was closed. It was still fine." Mima, the monk who had been patrolling last night, suddenly said, "By the way, it seems that only Changbajila, Meduo, and that Han man stayed here last night." "That Han man?" Damba was shocked. He quickly leaned forward and looked at the fist mark carefully. The more he looked at it, the more shocked he became. A few lamas next to him said with a smile, "Last night, I heard from Meduo that this fist mark was made by that Han man, and it was made from a distance of 3 meters. A lama shook his head and said, "Making such a fist mark from 3 meters away? That's impossible, absolutely impossible. Even Dorji Tenzin couldn't have done it." Another lama said with a smile, "Meduo is a child. She likes to exaggerate." The lama who had spoken first laughed and said, "That's right. I said I didn't believe it, but she was so angry that she almost fell out with me." The lamas laughed and chatted, but Damba's heart was pounding when he heard them. He was shocked. Although Dorji Tenzin is the guardian of the temple, he can't make such a fist mark on this stone from 3 meters away. What is the background of this Han man? Why is he so powerful? Damba suddenly thought of something and hurriedly shouted, "By the way, where is Dorji Tenzin? Hurry up and find him for me." A lama immediately said with a smile, "Abbot Damba, Dorji Tenzin left early in the morning. It seems that he left with Changbajila, Meduo, and the others." Damba's face suddenly turned ashen. His body swayed and he almost fell to the ground. He cried in his heart, "Dorji Tenzin is definitely no match for this Han man. What should I do?" Last week he was ranked 8th on the flower list. This week he had 3 breakouts. It was still the same as before. /om/ Chapter 177. Go to watch net. Early in the morning, Li Yundong followed Changbajila and the others in the direction of Snow Mountain Meduo. There were old people like Changbajila in their 70s and 80s, and there were also young people like Meduo who were 17 or 18 years old. The members were very complicated, but all of them were very devout, and their preparations for this pilgrimage were very perfect. Go to watch net. 7 km. Li Yundong found that some of them not only carried pots and pans on their backs, but also a whole set of knives. Meduo said that this was to guard against wolves and also to hunt wild animals to improve their meals. Pilgrims could not drive motor vehicles as it was not devout, but some of them drove carriages and ox carts pulled by yaks. The back of the carriages was spacious and flat, and all kinds of luggage were piled up. Some people who could not walk would also get on the carriages to rest for a while. At first, Li Yundong refused the invitation of Changbajila and the others. He did not sit on the carriages but just walked with the large group. Li Yundong's existence made the Tibetan boys in this group full of a sense of crisis and vigilance, especially since Meduo would come to Li Yundong from time to time, intentionally or unintentionally. This made the young people among them who were interested in Meduo feel jealous. However, Li Yundong was Changbajila's savior, so it was not appropriate for them to say anything more. They just held back their anger in their hearts and wanted to wear down this Han man on the journey. In their impression, Han people were all weak. As soon as they quickened their pace, the speed of the procession also increased. Some of the old, young women and children secretly complained in their hearts. At first, Meduo could still grit her teeth and persist, but later she really couldn't hold on anymore. She got into the carriage and watched the young Tibetans in the procession sandwiched Li Yundong in the middle, secretly competing with him. At first, Meduo was secretly worried. Although she knew that Li Yundong was an ascetic monk, her young compatriots were all good at long-distance running. Moreover, this was the plateau and many Han people would have altitude sickness here. She really did not know how long Li Yundong could last. But Li Yundong had run all the way to Tibet, and he had already trained his body to be as strong as iron. His internal organs had also been polished like fine steel. How could he be afraid of them? After a few days, the Tibetans were all worn down and could not hold on any longer. They got into the car one after another. Only Li Yundong was full of energy and walked as if he was flying. Watch net. H&M Meduo sat on the handcart and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. You said that you walked here from more than 2,000 kilometers away. I didn't believe it at first, but now I do. You're really amazing. I've seen so many people, but I've never seen anyone who can walk like you. Li Yundong looked at her with a smile and said, correct me. I didn't walk here. Meduo smiled and said, have you ever taken a bus like us? Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. No, I ran all the way here. The smile on Meduo's face suddenly disappeared and she said in horror, what? Did you run here? Li Yundong smiled and said, of course there's no need to run. How long would it take me to walk such a long distance? Can't you see that I'm barefoot? My shoes are ruined. Meduo looked at Li Yundong in awe and said with shock in her eyes, you're really amazing. Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything. Meduo looked at Li Yundong with admiration for a while. Suddenly her heart skipped a beat. Was this Han brother just hinting at me to make a pair of shoes for him? As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong's feet and saw that they were bare and covered with thick calluses. She nodded to herself and said with certainty in her heart, well, it must be like this. Thinking of this, she rolled her eyes, jumped out of the carriage and ran to the end of the line. She found an old lady and said, Puchamutashi, do you have a needle and thread here? Can you lend it to me? The old Tibetan woman was following the motorcade, turning the sutra cylinder and reciting scriptures. When she heard Meduo's voice, she stopped and said with a smile, do you want to sew something? I have it. Let me find it. After that, she went to her handcart and rummaged through the package for a while. Then she found a red sewing box and handed it over. Watch net. Meduo took it with a face full of joy. Puchamutashi, thank you so much. I'll give it back to you when I'm done. As she said this, she quickly ran to the front of the line like a little swallow. Puchamutashi looked at Meduo smiling so happily. As someone who had been through this, how could she not know what she was thinking? She shook her head with a smile, sighed and said, it seems that our Meduo's heart is no longer here. An old lady beside her also smiled and said, yes, her heart has already flown over the snow mountain. Puchamutashi looked at Meduo's back lovingly. May the god of the snow mountain bless her. Meduo asked for a needle and thread from Puchamutashi, then asked for a pair of shawls and cloth from someone else. Then she made a pair of cloth shoes according to her own visual judgment. Her hands were dexterous and she finished it in one day. The next day she ran to Li Yundong like she was presenting a treasure. She handed over the neatly sewn cloth shoes nervously and expectantly, saying shyly and boldly, here, try it on and see if it fits your feet. In the process of dealing with Li Yundong, Meduo had also become smarter. She didn't ask Li Yundong whether he accepted it or not. Instead, she directly asked him to wear it and asked if it fit his feet. Such a closed-door question made it impossible for Li Yundong to refuse. Li Yundong looked at the pair of simple but neatly made cloth shoes that Meduo had handed over with some surprise. He smiled and said, did you make them? Meduo's cheeks were a little red. She nodded, and the hand that was holding the cloth shoes began to tremble slightly. She was very afraid that Li Yundong would not take the pair of cloth shoes. If that happened, she would die of shame. The eyes of the Tibetan boys on the side turned red. Meduo was the goddess in their hearts. They were afraid of offending her and making her unhappy, but this Han man was even hesitant to accept Meduo's good intentions. Was really hateful. Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. Seeing that it was Meduo's kindness and that he really didn't have any shoes to wear, he readily took it and put it on his feet. He tried it on and found that the size was just right. When Meduo saw Li Yundong take it, her heart immediately fell back into her chest. She let out a long breath and smiled. Is it comfortable? Li Yundong smiled and said, it's comfortable. It fits my feet very well. Your craftsmanship is good. Meduo was a little proud. Of course I have many other crafts. Do you want to see them in the future? There was a hint of caution in her words, but at this time, Li Yundong was only thinking about cultivation. In his spare time he was also thinking about Suchan. How could he pay attention to such a little girl's thoughts? Li Yundong smiled casually and said, okay. Meduo's heart thumped wildly. She was both happy and happy. Did he agree to do it with me? Meduo's face was flushed. For a moment she couldn't suppress her shyness. With a cry, she turned her head and ran in the direction of the rear of the convoy. The long and thin braids on her head danced in the air. Li Yundong looked at her with a puzzled expression, then shook his head with a smile. He had been following these Tibetans all the way. Although he was walking at a fast pace, he always felt that his speed was too slow. He was bored for a while, and it was not convenient for him to practice Qigong while walking, so he remembered the thread-bound book that Changbajila had given him before. Li Yundong took it out of his arms and opened it to read to pass the time. But when he looked at it, Li Yundong was suddenly stunned. On the first page of the thread-bound book, there were 2 lines of golden words in Sanskrit and Tibetan. Li Yundong opened it and read a few more pages. He suddenly smiled bitterly. The book was full of Sanskrit and Tibetan, without a single Chinese character. How could he read it? Li Yundong was unwilling to give up and turned a few more pages. He found that it was full of Sanskrit and Tibetan characters. The Tibetan characters were large and the Sanskrit characters were small. When Li Yundong turned to the last few pages, he found that there were all kinds of handprints in the book. Li Yundong was curious and couldn't help but raise his head and glance around. He found Meiduo in the team and walked toward her. When Meiduo saw Li Yundong coming over, she couldn't help but feel nervous and expectant. She was uneasy, her eyes flashing, and she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. But Li Yundong came over, handed her the thread-bound book and said with a smile, "Can you translate it for me?" Meiduo was very disappointed, but she couldn't show it. She could only take the thread-bound book and take a look. With just one glance, she was shocked and said, "This is the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra? Changbajila actually gave you this classic?" Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Is it very precious?" Meiduo said with a serious face, "This is the most precious treasure of the Kathuo temple. It records the cultivation method of the esoteric Mahamudra." Li Yundong was shocked. "Then give it back to me quickly. I'll return it to Changbajila. How can I accept such a precious thing?" Meiduo secretly regretted saying, "Why did I say this? Since Changbajila wanted to give it to me, why did I say anything?" She laughed dryly and explained, "Of course, it used to be the most precious treasure of the temple, but now it's not necessarily so. Now the Kathuo temple has even begun to sell it as a tourist souvenir." Li Yundong was stunned, but then he thought, the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor, the supreme cultivation book of the Taoists, is being sold openly in Xinhua bookstore. Why can't the most precious treasure of the esoteric sect be sold? Thinking of this, Li Yundong felt relieved and no longer insisted on his idea. "Then can you translate it for me? It's like reading a heavenly book to me." Meiduo wanted to say, "Well, wait for me to translate it next to the book and then I'll give it to you." But when these words were on the tip of her tongue, Meiduo's heart skipped a beat. She smiled and said, "Then why don't you get on the handcart with me and I'll translate it for you?" When the two of them sat on the handcart, they would inevitably be very close to each other. Moreover, the carriage was shaking, so they would inevitably touch each other. When Meiduo thought of how close they would be, she couldn't help but feel her ears heat up. She thought to herself, "Will he agree?" Li Yundong didn't know what she was thinking, so he immediately agreed with a smile. "Okay." When Meiduo heard this, she was overjoyed. He agreed? Then, does that mean he really likes me? /om/. Chapter 178. Go to watch net. Meiduo and Li Yundong sat on the cart that was moving slowly. Although the road was long, Meiduo translated the words in the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra to Li Yundong word by word. It could be considered that she had found something to do. Li Yundong memorized the words that Meiduo had translated while thinking about the meaning in his heart. He didn't feel that time was passing slowly. Go to watch net. According to Meiduo's translation, the book was divided into 3 volumes and 3 parts. The first volume was the Ganges Mahamudra, which recorded the cultivation methods of the 3 Mahamudra, the Kongla Mahamudra and the Light Mahamudra. After Meiduo finished translating the volume, Li Yundong fell into deep thought. Although the first volume introduced the 3 kinds of Mahamudra, in fact it was more about the cultivation of Buddhism and the cultivation techniques of Buddhism. It did not involve the most critical problem, the problem of fighting. Cultivation was the same as martial arts. There were 3 different levels: talking, practicing, and fighting. Some people were just good at talking and fooling others. Instead, they became high officials of the sports commission and had disciples all over the world. However, this kind of person only talked but did not practice. They had no kung fu at all, let alone actual combat. There were also some people who only knew how to practice, and what they practiced was kung fu for health. The reason why martial arts were the quintessence of the country was not how strong their fighting skills were, but that it was the only fighting skill in the world that combined health and fighting skills. Some masters lacked fighting experience. They were very good at practicing, but once they entered the actual combat they would not be able to do it. There were also some people who only knew how to fight. All their kung fu was developed in actual combat and they were very powerful. However, people who knew how to fight could drown in the river and heroes who fell from the horse. If these people who knew how to fight did not know how to take care of themselves, it was easy for them to practice to death. Therefore most of them did not live long. Along the way of cultivation, Li Yundong had thought about this problem many times. He found that at present what he lacked the most was fighting skills. How should he fight when he met an enemy? In the past, when Li Yundong met Lin Youfa, he could still fight with him. But when he met Ruan Hongling, if it weren't for the fact that the boy Yuanyang blood in his body happened to restrain her, he would have died at that time. Especially after meeting Ao Wushuang, he was even more shocked by her amazing magic. He had no idea how to deal with this kind of magic. Su Chan and Zi Yuan, the two women that Li Yundong had come into contact with, were both good at talking, practicing, and fighting. Li Yundong had a vague feeling in his heart that if he wanted to become a top master, he had to talk, practice, and fight. All three of these were indispensable. He wouldn't say that this was very difficult. Without a disciple, he wouldn't have any power and he would be bullied by others. People couldn't always stand up for themselves, right? Not knowing how to cultivate meant that one's foundation was not solid enough. Even if one succeeded in building one's foundation, they would still be a fake core. If they encountered a strong opponent, they would be defeated in a single blow. If he didn't know how to fight, he would be useless. No matter how many disciples he had, no matter how solid his basic skills were, it would all be useless. If he didn't know how to block the opponent's attack, it would all be for naught. Only the combination of the three was the way of the king. At this time, Li Yundong already had a rough understanding of the way of cultivation. He could already speak clearly and logically, let alone practice. He had polished himself to the point that he was like well-tempered steel. The only thing he lacked now was fighting skills. When he got the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra, Li Yundong thought it was something like a martial arts secret book at first, but after listening to Meiduo's translation for a long time, he was a little disappointed in his heart. Go to c. 7 KOM. In fact, the first volume of this book was similar to the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. However, the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine explained the feasibility of cultivation from a medical point of view, while the first volume of this book explained the feasibility of Mahamudra cultivation from a Buddhist point of view. After Li Yundong digested the contents of the first volume, he asked Meiduo to start translating the contents of the second volume. The content of the second volume was even more limitless. It was all about the six-syllable Buddhist mantra. Although it was vivid, interesting, and thought-provoking, Li Yundong couldn't help but be more disappointed. When it came to the third volume, Meiduo suddenly raised her head, blinked her eyes and said, "That's it." Li Yundong was stunned. "What's it?" Meiduo handed the book in her hand to him and said, "The remaining volume is full of paintings." Li Yundong took the book and looked at it. He saw that it was full of handprints, and under the handprints were a few lines of words, which were also bilingual in Sanskrit and Tibetan. Li Yundong pointed to the painting and asked, "What does it say?" Meiduo said, "This is the Mahavarokana Mudra. Go to c. 7 KOM. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He pointed to another painting and said, "What about this one?" Meiduo smiled and said, "This is the Mahavarokana Mudra." Li Yundong looked at these handprints and suddenly couldn't help thinking, these handprints are so strange. Could it be that all the tricks of this book are in them? Thinking about this, he unconsciously began to imitate the handprints on them. Meiduo saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged on the handcart, his 5 fingers flying. One moment he made one handprint and the next he made another, from the Vajra Freedom Mudra to the Fixed Fundamental Mudra. His expression was solemn and he really looked like a Buddhist disciple. She couldn't help but laugh and say, "You're doing a good job. It's quite similar." After pinching his fingers for a while, Li Yundong didn't feel anything unusual, nor did he feel that it was a kung fu for beating people. He couldn't help but feel a little strange, so he tilted his head and thought about something. After thinking for a while, he suddenly pointed to the words under the paintings and asked, "What does it say?" These words were very short and looked like 1 or 2 words in a foreign language. At first, Meiduo subconsciously ignored them. She looked at them for a while and said, "This is a Buddhist mantra." Li Yundong immediately asked, "What mantra?" Meiduo smiled and said, "Of course it's the 6-word mantra of Buddhism, Mani Mani Padme Hum." Li Yundong was stunned. He suddenly thought excitedly, could it be that each handprint corresponds to a Buddhist mantra? Li Yundong quickly asked, "Then what is the mantra under the Mahavarokana Mudra?" Meiduo said, "It's the 6-word mantra of Buddhism. Li Yundong secretly noted it down in his heart. He had wanted to try the effect of this Mahamudra with the 6-word mantra now, but he looked around. At this time the sky was getting dark and there were too many people around, so he suppressed this idea. He just asked Meiduo to translate all the pictures and words correspondingly, and he memorized them by heart. The two of them whispered to each other in the cart, looking very intimate. Some young Tibetan boys who were interested in Meiduo were so jealous that their eyes turned red. One of the young men snorted coldly and said, "Are we just going to watch this Han man pick away our most precious and beautiful snow lotus?" Another young man said, "What else can you do? This Han man doesn't look like a young man. He's soft and easy to pinch. At first we ran so fast but we didn't wear him down. What can you do?" The young man who had spoken before snorted and said, "I'm going to challenge him tonight. I don't believe that he can beat me in wrestling." Tibetans and Mongolians were very similar in some ways. They both loved wrestling and wrestling very much. Men also regarded this kind of sport as the best way to prove their ability. If they could win in this aspect, it would be easy for them to win the favor of beautiful Tibetan girls. As soon as the young man finished speaking, the other young men also became excited. They whispered to each other and were ready to discuss how to teach this young man a lesson. While they were talking enthusiastically, Changbajila suddenly ran over from the front of the group and shouted, "Something happened ahead. Hurry up and help." Changbajila's prestige was extremely high. As soon as he spoke, the Tibetan young men followed him. Li Yundong, who was sitting in the back of the cart and secretly thinking about the mantra Mahamudra, saw this scene. He suddenly asked, "By the way, why do some of you call him Changbajila, but he calls himself Chiangba? Is his surname Chiangba or is his surname Chiangba and his name Jela?" Meiduo giggled and her voice was as moving as a silver bell. "We Tibetans don't have surnames, only names. Chiangba is his name and Jela means old man. Sometimes the names of Tibetans are repeated, so we add one or two other words at the back or front to distinguish them." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I see. What about you? What does Meiduo mean?" Meiduo's cheeks were slightly red and she said proudly, "Meiduo means the flowers blooming on the plateau." Li Yundong smiled and said, "You deserve this name." Meiduo looked at Li Yundong with burning eyes and asked, "Really? Do you think I'm beautiful?" Li Yundong was suddenly moved by Meiduo's gaze. For the first time he realized Meiduo's affection for him. He muttered to himself, "This girl, is she interested in me?" Li Yundong didn't want to respond to Meiduo's enthusiasm. He changed the topic, pointed to a group of people not far away and said, "What's going on over there?" Meiduo was a little disappointed. She straightened up, looked up and said, "I don't know, but won't we know when we go over and have a look?" As she said this, she boldly grabbed Li Yundong's hand, jumped out of the car and said to him with a smile, "Hurry up, let's go to the front and have a look." Li Yundong hadn't expected Meiduo to be so bold. He subconsciously pulled back, but Meiduo's hand was clenched so tightly that he couldn't move it. He was too embarrassed to force it out again, for fear of hurting this young and beautiful girl. The two of them held hands and ran forward quickly. When the Tibetans saw them holding hands, they began to whisper to each other. However, Meiduo ignored the surrounding gazes and squeezed into the crowd with Li Yundong. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that it was a jeep. The rear wheel was deeply stuck in a muddy pit. Two foreigners were pushing the car hard in front of it, and a group of Tibetan young men were pushing the car hard behind it. Beside this group of people stood a beautiful black-haired woman. It was Wuxia, the Chinese tour guide he had met once before. "It's them?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment and recognized the two foreigners. It was summer on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, and the road was not well repaired. For some reason, the jeep had gotten stuck in the muddy pit on the side of the road. No matter how hard the Tibetan young men and the two foreigners tried, the jeep could not be pushed out. Meiduo couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "Why don't you go and help?" Li Yundong nodded. "Okay." When the Tibetan young men who were pushing the car saw Meiduo holding Li Yundong's hand tightly, they immediately became jealous. When Li Yundong came over, they stood up at the same time and stopped pushing. They all stepped aside, wanting to let Li Yundong push the car alone and see him make a fool of himself. /om/ Chapter 179. Go to watch net. When Meiduo saw that these people were making things difficult for Li Yundong, she couldn't help but be furious. However, she couldn't speak ill of her own people in front of so many outsiders. She just felt indignant and worried for Li Yundong for fear that he would be embarrassed. Go to watch net. 7 km. Instead, he nodded and smiled at these Tibetans in a friendly manner. Then he took a deep breath, and a stream of qi surged up from his dantian. He lifted the chassis of the jeep with both hands, and with a loud shout he lifted the car with both hands. The surrounding crowd suddenly let out a shocked uproar. The two foreigners were stunned until Li Yundong shouted at them, "Hey, what are you waiting for?" Only then did they react and push the car in front of them. The rear tire of the jeep was no longer stuck in the pit. With a push from the two foreigners, the car was pushed forward. Li Yundong also carried the car through the mud pit and then put it down. His face did not change and his heart did not beat fast. Wuxia, who was standing to one side, took off the big sunglasses on her face in shock and looked at Li Yundong with her mouth agape, as if she couldn't believe that this disheveled and sloppily dressed man had such divine strength. F***ck, it's impossible, isn't it? Wuxia said, stuttering. The foreigner beside her also said with a face full of shock, "It's amazing, it's really amazing. I didn't expect to meet this amazing Chinese man here. Lu, are all the people in your country so amazing?" At this time Wuxia was speechless. For the first time, he had touched an old man who had been diagnosed as dead with his hand and saved him. The second time was even more exaggerated. So many young and strong men had pushed a cart, but it had not been pushed out of the mud pit. However, Li Yundong had pushed the cart out of the mud pit alone. If he wasn't a god, what was he? Not only Wuxia but all the Tibetans who saw this scene regarded Li Yundong as a celestial being for a moment. Those young Tibetans who had tried to challenge Li Yundong at night looked at each other with horror and fear in their eyes. "Duogu, do you still want to challenge him? Are you kidding me? He's so strong. How can he compete with him? Where did this guy come from? He's too strong. Yeah, he's like a reincarnated King Kong. He's amazing." When Li Yundong returned to Meiduo, her face was also flushed with excitement. Her eyes were full of worship and admiration. She kept shouting, "Mahagala, Mahagala." Li Yundong smiled in confusion and said, "What are you talking about?" When Meiduo saw that Li Yundong was in the limelight, and that some of her compatriots who had been very resistant to him before, were now convinced and looking at him with fear in their eyes, she became more and more proud and happy, as if she had done something amazing. She said with a smile, "Mahagala means guardian Vajra. It means that you are very strong." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's just a small trick. But the Mahamudra you translated for me may be the real amazing Kung Fu." At this time, the sky had gradually darkened. The two foreigners who were climbing the mountain did not continue their journey. They also stayed in the temporary camp of the Tibetan people. Watch net. Rainbow *** literature _learning %super #speed. Update. The Tibetans were hospitable. When they saw outsiders, they warmly took out their own brewed Highland barley wine and cheese to entertain them. The Westerners were also open-minded, unlike the Eastern Han who were introverted. After the two of them drank a bowl of wine, they immediately shouted and became very happy. Some of the Tibetans even surrounded the bonfire and sang and danced. Of course, the one who attracted the most attention at the banquet was Meiduo. After dancing a few times in the field, she suddenly found that Li Yundong did not attend the bonfire party. Curious, she found an excuse and walked toward the tent that the Tibetans had temporarily set up for Li Yundong. When Meiduo lifted the curtain of Li Yundong's tent, she suddenly lifted the curtain like a prank and shouted, "What are you doing?" But as soon as she finished speaking, her face fell because Li Yundong was not in the tent. Meiduo was very disappointed and muttered in her heart, "Where on earth did this Han brother go? Why didn't he come to such a lively party? What a disappointment." Just as she was about to turn around and leave, she suddenly heard a low voice coming from afar. The voice was vague and indistinct. Meiduo was shocked. Why does it sound so much like a wolf? Wolves were not uncommon on the Qinghai Tibet plateau. Meiduo immediately became nervous and vigilant. She turned around and ran quickly to Changbajila, whispering, "Changbajila, I think I heard the sound of a wolf." Changbajila was not only a devout believer, but also an old hunter. When he heard this, he immediately became vigilant and narrowed his eyes. "Where is it? Take me to have a look." As the spiritual leader of this group of people, he moved and attracted the attention of the others. Someone immediately asked, "Changbajila, what happened?" Changbajila laughed and said, "It seems that there are wolf cubs coming. Everyone be alert and take out your shotguns." At this time no one was in the mood to sing and dance. They stood up one after another. For a moment the men rushed into the tent to get their own shotguns and weapons, and the women also held long knives and iron pots in their hands. No one was empty. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. After listening to Wuxia's translation, The two foreigners saw that they were going to fight wolves, so they were very excited and wanted to follow them to watch the fun. The group of people ran noisily toward the place that Meduo had mentioned. Before they had taken a few steps, Changbajila turned his head and said angrily, "Be quiet. I want to beat a wolf to improve my diet. What if you scare the wolf away by shouting so loudly?" Everyone immediately burst into laughter and shut their mouths one after another. The group walked forward 100 or 200 meters and sure enough they heard a low voice. The sound came with the wind and everyone listened carefully. They whispered to each other, "Hey, it doesn't sound like a wolf. Meduo, did you hear it wrong?" Meduo blushed and said, "I clearly heard a wolf just now." Changbajila waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Don't quarrel. Let's go and have a look." The group walked forward dozens of meters. They didn't see the wolf, but they saw a figure sitting on the grass in the distance, shining with a faint golden light. Changbajila was shocked and motioned for everyone to stop talking. He walked forward another 10 meters. This time, Changbajila recognized that the person who had made the sound that Meduo had misunderstood was Li Yundong, the Han man. At this time, Li Yundong was sitting cross-legged in the wilderness. He made a Vajra fist with both hands. The index finger of his left hand was straight, and the little finger of his right hand was wrapped around the first joint of his left index finger, while the end of his left index finger was supported by the first joint of his right thumb. This was the Vairocana Mudra of the Mahamudra. The Buddha believed that the left hand represented the 5 great bodies of all living beings, and the right hand represented the guest crown of the 5 wisdom and 5 Buddhas. The guest crown was placed in the shape of the Mudra of all living beings, so it was called the Great Wisdom Fist Mudra. Therefore, the Vairocana Mudra was also called the Wisdom Fist Mudra. Li Yundong made this kind of mudra, but in his heart he was thinking about the profound meaning of the Vairocana Mudra. Bodhi guides the first wisdom mudra, the Vairocana Mudra of the great Sun Dharma realm, which can destroy all darkness. The true chi in his body flowed and rushed to the top of his head. Li Yundong suddenly felt as if someone had patted his forehead. The Baihui acupoint on the top of his head was opened, and then a cool feeling went straight down from the top of his head, as if someone was enlightening him. Li Yundong only felt that the 6-syllable mantra in his mind was unconsciously echoing, as if there were countless Vajras and thousands of Arhats chanting scriptures at the same time. The mantra of the Vairocana Mudra subconsciously jumped out of the scriptures all over the sky and turned into a shining golden word, Mudra. Li Yundong only felt that as soon as this word jumped out of his mind, the chi in his body seemed to have gone out of control, gushing toward the Mudra. He unconsciously spat out a word in a low voice, Mudra. With this shout, the faint golden light emitted from Li Yundong's body suddenly became more vigorous. Then he pushed the handprint in his hand forward, and suddenly a golden handprint of Vairocana Mahavairakana flew straight out. It grew bigger and bigger in the dark night, and finally disappeared into the distant night sky. Changbajila was stunned, and his heart was shaking wildly. He was more and more sure that Li Yundong was the reincarnation of Mahagala. He looked back and saw that the clansmen were also staring at Li Yundong, who was not far away, with their mouths agape. They saw that every time Li Yundong whispered a mantra, he would spit out a golden handprint. This golden mudra was as clear as a movie projection. It was shining with golden light, and it was as majestic as the Buddha. Li Yundong hadn't gone to the party before because he wanted to confirm what he had thought during the day. As soon as he confirmed it, it was just as he had imagined. This mudra really needed to be matched with the mantra to be effective. But what Li Yundong didn't know was that in fact, this Mahamudra and mantra could only be used by cultivators with strong jinchi in order to have the power to subdue demons. Li Yundong was originally a Taoist cultivator, but the first fighting method he had inadvertently learned was Buddhist Kung Fu. This had to be said to be a joke of fate. Changbajila and the others watched as Li Yundong struck out one Mahamudra after another. The dark sky seemed to be illuminated by his golden Mahamudra. They were so shocked that they trembled all over. Unable to control themselves, they immediately knelt on the ground and prostrated themselves in worship. It wasn't until Li Yundong made the 18th Mahamudra that he felt that his jinchi was a little weak, so he stopped. After running his chi for a while, he slowly stood up. When Li Yundong stood up and turned his head, he was shocked to see a large group of people kneeling not far behind him. These people were worshipping him as if they were worshipping a god. Li Yundong walked over, pulled Meduo up, and asked in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Meduo stared at Li Yundong with her big flashing eyes. She said with awe and worship, "Are you really the reincarnation of Mahagala?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Meduo said excitedly, "Don't deny it. We all saw it just now. You must be the reincarnation of Mahagala, right? Li Yundong shook his head and said, no, absolutely not. Seeing that he was denying it so completely and firmly, Meiduo couldn't help but feel a little surprised and doubtful. A Tibetan who didn't understand their Chinese couldn't help but urge them anxiously, Meiduo, what are you talking about? Meiduo turned to her clansmen and said, he said that he is not the reincarnation of Mahagala. The clansmen whispered to each other, how could he not be the reincarnation of Mahagala? By the way, the Han people may not understand the meaning of Mahagala in our Tibetan language. Meiduo, can you explain to him what Mahagala means? Meiduo said loudly, I've explained it, but he just won't admit it. There was obvious disappointment on the faces of these Tibetan people. They said one after another, impossible, this person must be our guardian Vajra. I've never seen anyone use the Mahamudra like this. If he's not the guardian Vajra, then what is he? Not necessarily. This person is Han, and there are also Buddhists among the Han people, but they are different from us. They are not called Vajra but Arhat. This kind of ability is also called Shintong. I think he is the Shintong Arhat of the Han people. No matter what he is, this person is definitely here to protect us. Otherwise, why would he meet us? Why did he save Changbajila? We have to try our best to keep him here. Keep him here? Oh, he's a Han from the Central Plains. What can we do to keep him here? Actually, it's not impossible to keep this Han person. As everyone was talking, a thought suddenly flashed through their minds, and their eyes fell on Meiduo. == The third update. /om/ Chapter 180. Go to WatchNet. When Meiduo saw that everyone's eyes were on her, her heart was as clear as a mirror. Her face suddenly turned red. She stamped her feet in shame and annoyance and said angrily, why are you all looking at me? As she spoke, she covered her face, turned around and ran away. WatchNet. 7K, / As the Tibetans watched Meiduo leave, they all burst into laughter. They knew that Li Yundong didn't understand Tibetan, so they said to Changbajila unscrupulously, Changbajila, you have to find a way to persuade Meiduo. Changbajila laughed and kept stroking his white beard with his hand. There's no need for me to persuade her. Meiduo is more impatient than we are. After saying that, the crowd burst into laughter. At this time, Meiduo, who was running back to the camp, became even more shy when she heard the laughter coming from the wind. She covered her face with her hands, and her cheeks were so red that it looked as if they were about to bleed. However, her big sparkling eyes were full of passion and expectation. Li Yundong couldn't understand what they were saying, but he was not stupid. Seeing that these people's eyes were full of admiration and awe, as well as a cunning light, as if they were plotting against him, he muttered in his heart, what are these guys laughing at? Changbajila saw that Li Yundong was a little embarrassed under everyone's gaze, so he waved his hand and said, well, go back to sleep. We still have to hurry up early tomorrow morning. Only then did the crowd disperse. After pointing at Li Yundong for a while, the two foreigners and the Chinese tour guide also returned to their tents. Li Yundong hadn't expected that his practice in the wilderness would alarm so many people. He secretly made up his mind that before he found a suitable place to start the Zhuji phase, he would never do such a shocking thing again. Li Yundong returned to his tent and slept for the night. At dawn, he heard the sound of chants, the sound of whips lashing the cows and horses, and the loud shouts of people coming from the camp. Among them, the loudest and clearest was the voice of a girl singing loudly. Although she was singing in Tibetan and Li Yundong couldn't understand it, the melody was high and melodious, making Li Yundong feel relaxed and happy. He couldn't help but praise it in his heart. After getting out of the tent, Li Yundong saw that the Tibetans were busy tearing down the tents and packing them up on the ox carts and carriages. When some of the Tibetans saw Li Yundong, they were no longer as vigilant and cautious as before. They all smiled and greeted Li Yundong warmly. There were also some old Tibetan women who enthusiastically served him hot milk wine and highland barley cakes. Li Yundong was infected by their enthusiasm. He smiled and drank the milk wine in one gulp, then ate a few highland barley cakes. Suddenly these Tibetans smiled happily and treated Li Yundong even more warmly. WatchNet. 7KOM. Some of these Tibetans had started their annual pilgrimage when they were in their teens, so they were very familiar with the work. In less than 30 minutes, the whole team was ready to set off. Li Yundong followed the convoy. As he walked slowly, he secretly held all kinds of Mahamudra that he had practiced the day before. Seeing him like this, the Tibetans beside him whispered to each other, not daring to disturb him. Only Meiduo kept singing like a happy lark in the team, as if there was something happy in her heart. Changbajila rode an old horse and listened for a long time. He heard Meiduo singing in Tibetan, "My beloved, if she were my lifelong companion, it would be like fishing up a treasure from the bottom of the sea." He suddenly turned his horse in front of the team, walked up to Meiduo and said with a smile, "Meiduo, you usually look very smart. Why are you so stupid today?" Meiduo looked at Changbajila in confusion and blinked. "Changbajila, what are you talking about? How am I stupid?" Changbajila laughed and said, "Your Han brother doesn't understand a single word of Tibetan. How can he understand all the Tibetan songs you sing?" Meiduo blushed and said with some dissatisfaction, "But I can't sing in Chinese." Changbajila winked and said, "You can translate the Tibetan into Chinese and then sing it." Meiduo was a little shy. "But what if I don't sing well and get laughed at?" Changbajila laughed and said, "You can just go to him and sing for him alone. We won't listen. Isn't that fine?" Meiduo rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "That's a good idea." As she spoke, she jumped off the cart and ran in the direction of Li Yundong. Changbajila couldn't help laughing. Looking at Meiduo's slim and energetic back, his smile was full of love. "Han brother." Meiduo ran up to Li Yundong like a happy bird, looked at him with joy and expectation and said, "Can I sing for you?" Li Yundong loosened his fingers that were pinching the Mahamudra and looked at Meiduo with a smile. "Didn't I tell you to call my name? Calling me Han brother sounds weird. By the way, weren't you singing just now?" Meiduo's cheeks were slightly red, but her eyes looked at Li Yundong boldly and wildly. "Can you understand the lyrics?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. "I don't understand a word. Go to the internet." 7 KOM. Meiduo smiled and said, "Then I'll translate it into Chinese and sing it for you, okay?" Li Yundong said curiously, "You can sing it in Chinese? Well, sing it for me." Meiduo cleared her throat and deliberately waited for the people around them to walk to the front. The two of them slowly fell behind the crowd. After a long distance, she began to sing, "I asked the Buddha, why does it always snow when I'm sad? The Buddha says, winter is about to pass. Leave some memories. I asked the Buddha, why does it always snow on a night when I don't care? The Buddha says, people always miss a lot of real beauty when they're not paying attention. I asked the Buddha, will it snow again in a few days? The Buddha says, don't just focus on this season and miss this winter." Meiduo's voice was clear and melodious. She sang this philosophical and highly suggestive love song, which was melodious and melodious. Li Yundong felt that all the sounds in the vast world had disappeared, leaving only Meiduo's moving voice lingering in the air for 3 days. After Meiduo finished singing, she boldly glanced at Li Yundong. She saw that Li Yundong's expression changed and his eyes were fixed on the front, as if he was thinking about something. Meiduo asked tentatively, "Didn't I sing well?" Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses and say repeatedly, "You sang well. You sang so well that I was a little fascinated." Meiduo was overjoyed. "Do you like the song I sang?" Li Yundong glanced at Meiduo and saw that she was staring at him. He was too familiar with this kind of gaze. Wasn't this the kind of gaze that the little girl often looked at him with? This kind of gaze was full of worship and love. Only a girl who had fallen in love would have such a gaze. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He suddenly understood, I'm afraid that this girl really likes me. In the past, Li Yundong might have been secretly proud of himself, but now he was a little worried. This time he had come to Tibet specifically for Zhuji phase cultivation. In order to clear his mind and restrain his desires, Li Yundong had even sold his mobile phone, which could be used to contact Su Chan. He was afraid that he would not be able to bear the pain of lovesickness and be entangled with the little girl on the phone again. But Li Yundong had never expected that in the end, he would still be in love again. What should I do? Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. He had an idea and deliberately changed the topic. Well, your singing is really nice. Can you sing a few more? Seeing that Li Yundong liked it, Meiduo was so happy that she began to sing again. Her voice was very good and she could use her qi. After singing for 2 hours in a row, she didn't feel tired at all. Her voice was still the same as before without any change. Li Yundong couldn't help but say with admiration, "You're really amazing. You haven't felt tired at all after singing for so long." Meiduo looked at Li Yundong with a smile. "If you like it, I'll sing for you." As she said this, she suddenly gathered her courage and grabbed Li Yundong's hand. "In the future, I'll only sing for you, okay?" After more than a month of hard work, Li Yundong's will was as firm as steel, but at this time, his heart was still pounding. He didn't know what to say. He knew that he wouldn't agree, but he was also afraid that if he said no, it would hurt this girl who was as pure as a snow lotus. Fortunately, at this time Changbajila shouted, "Meduo, it's time to eat. You've been singing all morning. Aren't you hungry?" This sentence saved Li Yundong. He quickly said, "Let's go eat first." As he said this, he ignored Meduo and fled in a panic. Meduo stomped her feet angrily. That annoying Changbajila. Why didn't he say it earlier or later? Why did he say it now? I'm so angry. After lunch, Li Yundong spent the afternoon with the Tibetans. He no longer dared to be alone. Meduo wanted to find an opportunity to get close to Li Yundong, but he found an opportunity to avoid her. Meduo was so angry that she kept stomping her feet. It wasn't until evening when the Tibetans walked to a long winding river that Changbajila waved his horsewhip and shouted, "Let's rest here today." At a glance, Li Yundong saw that at this time the sun was setting, and the sky was covered with fiery red clouds. In the distance there was a holy snow-capped mountain, winding and continuous. Nearby there was a silver satin-like river, passing through the green earth. At this time, as long as you took a photo frame and placed it anywhere, it would look like an oil painting with thick ink and heavy color. What a beautiful place. Li Yundong praised in his heart. He more and more understood why Ziyuan had asked him to come here to cultivate. Not only was it at a high altitude, but it was also closer to Yunjiutian. The air here was fresh, unlike the city which was full of car exhaust and people breathed polluted air every day. Li Yundong looked around and felt that the world was wide. He suddenly felt enlightened, and the qi in his body was much more vigorous. This kind of situation was naturally more suitable for cultivating the Zhuji phase. Li Yundong looked at the clean river and suddenly had an idea. He wanted to take a bath in the river, but he knew that the Tibetans had their rules. Some rivers were not for bathing, so he found Changbajila and said, "Changbajila, I want to take a bath in the river. I wonder if that's okay?" Changbajila thought for a while and said, "This river used to not allow people to take a bath casually, but you are the reincarnation of Mahagala, so of course you can take a bath in this river." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then wouldn't I be making a special offer? No, that's not good. I'd better not take a bath." Changbajila laughed and said, "We lack water resources in Tibet, so people rarely take a bath. Yuhan people are different from us. We can tolerate not taking a bath for a year, but you absolutely can't. Go ahead, it's okay. In fact, girls who like to be clean will also go to the river to take a bath. You're not the only one." Li Yundong was relieved and said goodbye to Changbajila. When he came out of the tent, he saw some Tibetan women going to the river to wash and take a bath in groups. When these women saw him, they smiled at him boldly and greeted him in Tibetan. Li Yundong smiled and watched them go away. Then he turned around and went to his tent, ready to take a bath in the evening. Changbajila watched Li Yundong go back to his tent. He stroked his beard, thought for a while, and then walked toward Maidwa's tent. Late at night, the sky was dotted with stars and the bright moon was hanging high in the sky. Li Yundong came out of the tent gently. He went to the river, took off his clothes, found a stone to press them down, and then jumped into the river. In the past, when Li Yundong had been an otaku in the city, he had never experienced the feeling of rushing for a month without taking a bath. As he rubbed his body, a layer of old mud immediately appeared on his body. He couldn't help but laugh and say, "Hey, I washed it once before. I didn't expect it to be so dirty after a few days. If that girl knew, she would dislike me." He was taking a bath alone, talking to himself. Suddenly, he heard a sound of water coming from the river. Li Yundong immediately became vigilant. He turned his head and shouted in a low voice, "Who is it?" When Li Yundong turned his head, he was immediately stunned. He saw Meduo walking into the river step by step. She was covering her chest with her hands, completely naked. The bright moonlight shone on Meidwa's body, making her skin look as attractive as cheese. The girl stared at Li Yundong shyly and boldly. She said, "Han brother, it's me. Let me help you take a bath, okay?" Li Yundong felt as if his mind was about to explode. He watched helplessly as the naked girl approached him step by step. For a moment he was at a loss and didn't know what to do. /om/ Chapter 181. Go to watch net. Maidwa's enthusiasm was within Li Yundong's expectations, but Maidwa's boldness was something he had never expected. For a moment he watched the girl get closer and closer and he couldn't help but step back. Go to watch net. 7K, Li Yundong stammered, "Why did you come to take a bath too?" This. Meiduo looked at Li Yundong shyly and boldly. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, Han brother, am I not beautiful? Li Yundong saw that Meiduo was covered in moonlight, as if she were wearing a layer of silver gauze. Although she was naked, it doubled her holy beauty. Even a blind man would open his eyes at this time to see the purest beauty in the world. Li Yundong only took a glance at her, and he felt his whole body heat up. He didn't dare to look at her again, so he turned around and wanted to escape. But Meiduo grabbed his hand. The strength of her fingers and the firmness of her voice far exceeded Li Yundong's expectations. Han brother, you also like me, don't you? Li Yundong was forced into a corner by Meiduo, but he calmed down. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Meiduo, any man will like a girl like you. Hearing this, Meiduo smiled and her ears turned red. Then why did you run away when you saw me? Li Yundong sighed. He turned around and looked straight into Meiduo's eyes, not glancing at her snow-white chest at all. He said, because in my heart, there is already a girl I love deeply. Meiduo's whole body shook violently. She looked at Li Yundong in horror. Are you married? Li Yundong shook his head. No, I'm not married, but I already have a girlfriend. Meiduo looked at Li Yundong and shook her head vigorously. No, since you already have a girlfriend, why did you look at me like that? Li Yundong sighed and said, when I first saw you, I only felt that your eyes were pure, just like the girl I love deeply, so I subconsciously regarded you as her. With tears in her eyes, Meiduo said stubbornly, you lied to me. You deliberately made up such a person, didn't you? Li Yundong sighed slightly. He pulled Meiduo to the shore and draped the clothes she had taken off on the shore over her. He also put on his clothes with his back facing Meiduo. Then he pulled Meiduo to sit on the shore and began to tell her the story of him and Suchan WatchNet. Achanjum Li Yundong was very eloquent. He told her all these things clearly from their meeting, acquaintance, friendship and love. When it came to the happy and funny parts, Meiduo laughed with tears in her eyes, completely forgetting the misery of being rejected by Li Yundong. When it came to the part where the two of them had almost separated because of the misunderstanding, Meiduo couldn't help crying again. In the end, Li Yundong said that in order to enforce justice on behalf of heaven, he had sent heavenly thunder to kill young Master He, and Suchan had been taken away by her master because of him. Meiduo had cried because of the separation between the two of them. She asked with tears in her eyes, what happened after that? After that. Li Yundong let out a long sigh and said slowly, after that I understood a truth. Meiduo wiped away her tears and asked, what is it? Li Yundong sighed and said, a man must be strong. If a man is not strong, he can't even protect himself, let alone the woman he loves. So you came here to cultivate? Meiduo asked. Li Yundong nodded. Yes, that's right. Meiduo was moved and said, no wonder you walked all the way here. It turns out that you did it for the girl you love. Li Yundong smiled at Meiduo. The song you sang before was really good. I asked Buddha, why does it always snow on a night that I don't care about? Buddha said, when people don't pay attention they always miss a lot of real beauty. What a good song, but some real beauty is destined not to belong to me. If people are too greedy they may even lose what they already have. Don't you think so? Meiduo's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Although she had been rejected by Li Yundong, her love and admiration for this boy in her heart had deepened. She admired Li Yundong's courage and boldness in order to eradicate evil people, regardless of his own safety. She admired Li Yundong's persistence and perseverance in embarking on an extremely difficult cultivation for the girl he loved. Go to the internet. Meiduo's eyes were full of infatuation. She looked at Li Yundong's thick eyebrows and straight nose. She had always thought that this Han brother was not very handsome with a beard, but at this time, he looked mature, steady, and resolute. In the face of Li Yundong's question, Meiduo said in a daze, Han brother, I understand. I won't stop you from cultivating. Can I sing another song for you? Li Yundong smiled and said, okay, your singing is really like the sound of nature. It's so beautiful. Meiduo thought to herself, no matter how beautiful it is, it can't capture your heart. She calmed down, opened her red lips slightly and sang. You see me or you don't see me. I'm there, neither sad nor happy. You read me or you don't miss me. Love is there, neither coming nor going. You love me or you don't love me. Love is there, neither increasing nor decreasing. You follow me or you don't want to follow me. My hand is in your hand and I won't give it up. Come to my arms or let me live in your heart. Silence, love, silence, joy. Meiduo's singing was sad and touching. For a moment, Li Yundong was stunned. After Meiduo finished singing, she looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She saw that Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on the distance, and his expression was full of memories. Her heart was sour and bitter, and for a moment she couldn't help but burst into tears. Meiduo wiped her tears, sobbed, turned her head and ran back to her tent. She didn't even want the clothes on the ground. Li Yundong sat alone by the river in a daze. After a long time he came to his senses and let out a long sigh. Early the next morning, Li Yundong took all his luggage to Changbajila and said goodbye to him. "What? You're leaving?" Changbajila was shocked and asked loudly. Li Yundong nodded and said with a firm expression, "Yes, I've disturbed you for several days. I'm a cultivator and it's better for me to be alone." Changbajila opened his mouth. He wanted to ask him to stay but he didn't know what to say. After a long time he sighed and said, "Han boy, you didn't give me a chance. Let me treat you to a feast when I get back and repay you for saving my life." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Changbajila, I'm already very grateful for the Mahamudra secret method sutra you gave me. It's very useful to me. You don't have to be so polite anymore. I have to leave today." Seeing that Li Yundong had made up his mind, Changbajila didn't force him to stay. He just asked, "Does Meiduo know?" Li Yundong nodded. Changbajila sighed and said, "This child, alas, shall I ask her to see you off?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "Forget it." As he said this, he carried the fan of 7 treasures in his luggage and left Changbajila's tent. Changbajila chased after him and led a horse next to him. He stuffed the reins into Li Yundong's hand and said, "Take this with you. When you're tired on the way it can also lighten your burden." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Changbajila, I'm a cultivator. How can I do such a lazy thing? It's like taking a break on a pilgrimage. Would you be willing?" Changbajila was silent. After a while he said, "Then you should bring more food and water. That should be fine, right?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and accepted Changbajila's kindness with a smile. He took a bag of Highland barley cakes and a pot full of milk wine and set off again. At this time the Tibetans in the camp had heard that Li Yundong was leaving, so they came over to say goodbye to him. Li Yundong smiled and said hello to them. He glanced around the crowd but didn't see Meiduo. He sighed in his heart and turned to leave. When Li Yundong had become a small black dot on the horizon, Meiduo ran over, panting. As she ran she shouted, "Changbajila, Han brother is leaving?" When she ran to Changbajila she stopped and looked at Li Yundong's back with a sad face. She held a pair of cloth shoes that had just been sewn in her hand and bit her lip tightly. She was silent, tears falling down her cheeks. Changbajila sighed and said, "Hurry up and catch up with him on my horse. It's not too late." Meiduo shook her head and choked with sobs. "If he has me in his heart he will look back. When he does I will catch up with him and give him this pair of shoes. He has such a long way to go. How can he go without shoes?" She looked at Li Yundong's back all the way but he never looked back until his figure finally disappeared into the horizon. Meiduo couldn't help it anymore. She lay on Changbajila's shoulder and cried loudly. As she cried she said, "Why won't he look back at me? Is there no place for me in his heart at all?" Changbajila stroked Meiduo's hair lovingly. "Silly girl, he's afraid that if he looks back at you, you will really live in his heart." When Meiduo heard this she felt a little better. She wiped her tears and looked at Changbajila eagerly. "Is what you said true?" Changbajila smiled and sighed slightly. "Well, don't cry. If fate wills it, we will meet again in the future." Meiduo looked in the direction where Li Yundong had gone and couldn't help singing again. "That day, I closed my eyes in the fragrant mist of the scripture hall. Suddenly I heard the mantra in your chanting. That month I shook all the scripture buckets not to release souls but to touch your fingertips. That year I kowtowed and crawled on the mountain road not to see you but to feel your warmth. That life I turned the mountains, the rivers and the pagodas, not to cultivate the next life, but to meet you on the way." Meiduo's singing was pleasant to the ear, and these Tibetan compatriots all knew it. But at this time Meiduo was singing from the bottom of her heart, and every sentence was from the bottom of her heart. Her true feelings were revealed, and her singing was particularly beautiful and touching. For a moment, everyone was stunned. The world was extremely quiet, and only the Tibetan girl's singing echoed gently. /om/ Chapter 182. Go to Watch Network. After Li Yundong left Qiangba, Meiduo, and the others, he continued walking in the direction of the Himalayas. After running for less than half an hour, he suddenly heard the sound of a car horn behind him. Go to. He turned his head and saw two foreigners driving up from behind. They were holding cameras in their hands and were shooting while shouting and waving at him. Li Yundong smiled and waved at them. The Chinese tour guide Wuxia, who was driving, said with a smile, "Would you like a ride?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No need." Wuxia hadn't expected that her invitation would be rejected. Her face suddenly fell and she snorted coldly in her heart. What's so great about him? Wasn't he just a little stronger and knew a few strange tricks? A god? I think he's more like a fraud. Why are you pretending? In fact, Wuxia was full of curiosity about Li Yundong, who had a mysterious identity and magical power. She had wanted to go forward and talk to him, but these days, Meiduo had been pestering Li Yundong like a forbidden animal, not allowing anyone else to get close to her. If she wanted to get close to Li Yundong and talk to him, she would be looked at with hostility by the surrounding Tibetans. It was not easy for Li Yundong to part ways with this group of people. Wuxia chased after him happily, but her kindness was rejected. She felt very depressed. She stepped on the gas pedal and the jeep roared and drove away. Wuxia drove the car and looked at Li Yundong, who was gradually getting farther away in the rearview mirror. She snorted and said, "If you have the ability, don't beg me all the time." After driving a certain distance away from Li Yundong, she slowly slowed down. She kept hanging in front of him all the way, and she could see Li Yundong behind her through the rearview mirror. At first, Wuxia didn't pay attention, but after driving for more than 20 kilometers, she found that Li Yundong was still following in the rearview mirror and had not been pulled far away. No way. Wuxia's eyes widened and she looked back. The two foreigners also noticed this situation. They turned back and kept shooting at Li Yundong with their cameras. As they filmed, they exclaimed, "God, this guy has been running behind us for more than 20 kilometers. Isn't he tired?" Wuxia snorted in her heart. She stepped on the accelerator and gradually pulled him away. She didn't slow down until she couldn't see him anymore. Watch net. 7KOM. Rainbow caret asterisk literature underscore learning % super hashtag speed. Update. It wasn't until noon when they stopped the car and had lunch by the roadside that they saw a small black dot on the horizon in the distance. The closer they got, the bigger it became. When the two foreigners saw it, they immediately exclaimed, "Are my eyes deceiving me? This guy has been running all this time. Hasn't he rested?" Wuxia, who had just taken a bite of the dry food and was drinking water, suddenly choked on the water. She patted her chest and coughed, watching Li Yundong quickly pass by them with her eyes wide open. Li Yundong's speed was amazing. His legs were like steel machines, which made them feel that the person passing by in front of them was not a mortal, but a giant with infinite power. After Li Yundong passed by like a gust of wind, the two foreigners and Wuxia looked at each other and quickly stuffed the dry food in their hands into their mouths. Then they quickly ran back to the car. Are you kidding me? A car can't outrun a person. Is there any justice? Is there any law? They drove forward in a fit of pique and soon caught up with Li Yundong. However, after driving for a while, when they were about to rest at night, Li Yundong followed them like a ghost. The two foreigners were so scared that they shouted, "This is impossible. Is this guy on stimulants?" Wuxia also widened her eyes and watched Li Yundong run past them again. She couldn't help murmuring, "Is this guy a robot? Why isn't he tired at all?" They didn't know that Li Yundong was only one step away from the Zhuji phase at this time. The Zhenqi in his body was vast and majestic. Before, when his foundation was not solid, he hadn't felt tired even running for a few days and nights, let alone now that the Zhenqi in his body had been tempered and condensed like steel. Li Yundong ran all the way. When he was tired, he found a place to shelter himself from the wind and rain and sat down on the spot. After a short nap, he continued his journey in high spirits. When he was hungry, he would chew a few mouthfuls of highland barley cakes. When he was thirsty, he would drink a few large bottles of water by the river on the plateau and then drink to his heart's content. Go to see. 7KOM. Rainbow caret asterisk literature underscore learning % super hashtag speed. Update. The water on the plateau was different from that on the mainland. It was clear and transparent without pollution. Li Yundong drank it in a few mouthfuls and felt refreshed. After running like this for 10 days, Li Yundong finally arrived at the foot of the Himalayas. Li Yundong looked up and felt that the mountain in front of him was magnificent and towering into the clouds. He couldn't see the end of it at a glance, as if the top of the mountain went straight to the 9 clouds. Before he started climbing, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. Can a human climb such a high mountain? Although there are records of climbers conquering the highest peaks in the world, these people all have professional climbing equipment. Can I climb this mountain covered with thick ice and snow alone? However, didn't I come here from thousands of miles away to challenge the roof of the world and borrow the power of heaven and earth to build my Zhuji phase? Li Yundong stood at the foot of the mountain for a while. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, the fear in his eyes suddenly disappeared, replaced by fanaticism and excitement. At the beginning, Li Yundong could still see the lush green vegetation at the foot of the mountain, but the higher he climbed, the shorter the grass. Gradually, there was only tenacious green moss growing on the rocks, and the green grass and shrubs had disappeared. Li Yundong looked down from above and saw that the ground was thick green, as if it was covered with a layer of green blanket. The river on the grassland was like a silver necklace running through the green blanket. Li Yundong estimated that he had climbed about 1 or 2 kilometers high. As Li Yundong continued to climb, frost began to form on the ground, and the journey became more arduous and difficult. Since he didn't have professional climbing shoes, he had to focus all his attention on the complicated frost under his feet. Every step he took was like walking on thin ice. After climbing for more than 2 kilometers, Li Yundong looked back and found that he was already in a silver world. There was ice and snow everywhere, and the whole world was wrapped in silver. The land under his feet had become very far away. The river, which had been like a silver necklace, had now become a silver filament. It was so small that if one didn't pay attention it would be easy to ignore it. Li Yundong looked up and felt that the peak in front of him was still too high to reach. He didn't know which mountain he was climbing. The only thing he knew was that he had to climb up and keep climbing up. Although there was a strong wind on the mountain at this time, and the cold wind was like a knife, Li Yundong was only wearing a thin shirt. He kept climbing in this world of ice and snow with difficulty. Every step he took seemed to take a lot of effort and his body would sway slightly. But even though his climb seemed so difficult, Li Yundong still did not flinch or hesitate at all. In his opinion, wasn't life such a process of climbing a dangerous peak? Some people were afraid of such hardships, so they stayed at the foot of the mountain to enjoy the comfortable environment, but they missed a good opportunity to enjoy the infinite scenery. The more Li Yundong climbed up, the more bitter and strong the cold wind became. He had to spend a lot of jinqi and jinqi to resist the cold of -10 degrees. Some people were born with strong yang qi, so they wore less than ordinary people in winter, because the strong blood qi in their bodies was enough to help them resist the cold. Some people were particularly afraid of the cold, so they wrapped themselves tightly in winter because they lacked yang qi in their bodies, and their blood qi was not enough to help them resist the cold. Many times in autumn or even winter there were many people on the street wearing backless clothes, midriff-bearing clothes and short skirts, but most of them were young people because they were young, full of yang qi and strong blood qi. However, people in their 30s rarely wore such clothes because their bodies had begun to go downhill. There was not enough yang qi in their bodies and their blood qi was not strong. Li Yundong's body had been transformed by the Renyuan Jin Dan, and his internal organs had been constantly honed and tempered. Therefore his blood qi was unbelievably vigorous. Although he was only wearing a thin shirt, his hands and feet didn't shiver in the freezing cold of -10 degrees Celsius. On the contrary, a faint layer of white qi was emitting from his body, which was the hot qi discharged from his body when the blood qi in his body was tumbling. Li Yundong climbed up the mountain range for about 2,000 meters. When he looked down again he could no longer see the land nearby. At first glance, Li Yundong could only see a sea of clouds surrounding the mountain range, as if he was already in a fairyland. Li Yundong raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw the rolling mountains on the vast land. The top was covered with snow, and the bottom was lush green. It was like two worlds with distinct colors and levels. Li Yundong only felt that he was in this vast world, and his whole body was integrated with it. He seemed to be able to touch the sky with a stretch of his hand, and the earth seemed to be within his grasp with a stretch of his hand. No wonder the great man once said, "Infinite scenery lies in the dangerous peak." If I hadn't climbed such a dangerous peak, how would I have known that there would be such a magical and magnificent scenery in the world, and that people would have such lofty sentiments and lofty aspirations? Li Yundong sighed in his heart. He felt an incomparably powerful force emerge in his body. This force made him feel as if he was the only ruler between heaven and earth. It's not without reason that Ziyuan asked me to come to such a place to Zhuji phase. Li Yundong only felt that the qi and blood in his chest were tumbling, and he couldn't help but want to roar. As soon as this idea emerged, Li Yundong felt that the 5 qi in his 5 internal organs were about to move, and the jinqi accumulated in the 3 dantians was also boiling, like a flood that was about to open the floodgates at any time. Li Yundong knew that this was a sign that he could start the Zhuji phase. Although he hadn't reached the top of the mountain, he still remembered something that Ziyuan had said to him. You don't have to reach the top. As long as the Jinqi in your body responds, you can start the Zhuji phase. Li Yundong looked around. He knew that no one could disturb him when he was in the Zhuji phase. He thought to himself, no one will come to such a place, right? After thinking for a while, Li Yundong used his hands to dig a small hole with his back against the mountain. The hole was sunken so that he could hide in it, and he sat cross-legged in it. As soon as Li Yundong entered meditation, the Jinqi in his body roared, as if a dam had been opened and an avalanche had occurred. /om/ Chapter 183. Go to watch net. He clearly remembered that the last time he had reached the Zhuji phase, Su Chan had once explained to him what it was all about. Watch net. 7K, O-/ but when he put aside everything and really entered the Zhuji phase, he found that when he really entered the Zhuji phase, the whole spirit space was dark and chaotic. He couldn't see anything, and even if he wanted to shout, he couldn't hear his own voice. In this Zhuji phase, Lu Chuan, Yang He, and the others no longer appeared in Li Yundong's spirit space, because he had attracted heavenly thunder to kill Yang He, which had completely vented the anger in his heart. Su Chan's departure also made him temporarily restrain his mind and enter the cultivation realm of the unity of body and mind, the unity of heaven and man. In such a state, Li Yundong's whole person fell into a state of ignorance, tastelessness, indifference, and indifference. The only thing he could do was still think. It was as if he was in a chaotic world and he was the ancient god Pangu, who was trapped in this chaotic world. Humans were born in their mother's womb, just like Pangu was trapped in the chaos. The first movement that a baby pursued freedom was to kick its legs. With this movement, it meant that the child had basically matured and couldn't wait to come into this world. Li Yundong suddenly felt that the Zhuji phase of a cultivator was like a baby in its mother's womb, struggling bitterly to get out of its mother's womb and come to this world. However, the struggle of a baby was an unconscious activity of life, while the foundation building of a cultivator was a conscious challenge of the laws of survival between heaven and earth. Li Yundong placed himself on a dangerous peak in a world of ice and snow. The extreme cold forced him to use a large amount of yang qi to resist the cold, and only a small part of his yang qi could be used to build the Zhuji phase. Although Li Yundong had trained the yuan yang qi in his body to be many times more vigorous than before, and he had tempered his jinqi to be as condensed as steel, he still felt extremely strenuous in such a dangerous environment. Li Yundong had been trapped in this chaotic world for a long time. He gradually felt that the world around him was slowly becoming colder. Even the sound of the cold wind outside was blowing in his ears, making him feel as if there was a terrible cold wind in this chaotic world. The chaotic world was getting colder and colder, and Li Yundong's hands and feet were also getting colder. Only the dantian in his lower abdomen seemed to have a flame that would not go out all year round, constantly burning and jumping. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He remembered what Su Chan had told him before. There's no need to wait for the winter solstice to practice kung fu. This little bit of yang fire was the purest and most essential yang qi in the human body. As long as this little bit of yang qi existed, a person's vitality would not be cut off. Watch net. There is heaven and earth in one's own universe. The heart is higher than the heavens and the kidneys are higher than the earth. Breathing out the heart and sucking in the navel is the truth of breath regulation. Su Chan had read Lu Dongbin's cultivation poem when he was in the Zhuji phase. At this time, Li Yundong recalled that every word was clear and distinct. Li Yundong guarded this little bit of yang qi tightly, as if he was guarding a flickering oil lamp in the wild wind, or a small boat that could be overturned at any time in the stormy waves of the storm. In the midst of the raging waves, Li Yundong slowly entered the state of Jinqi from the mortal state. The little bit of yuan yang qi in his body also expanded bit by bit, and the small flame also became more vigorous bit by bit. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong suddenly found that the small flame had become a fist-sized fireball. No matter how strong the cold wind around him was, it could no longer affect the vigorous burning of the fireball. Then the fireball continued to grow, burning toward the dantian in Li Yundong's chest. The qi of the 5 internal organs in Li Yundong's body was attracted by the fireball. The qi hidden deep in the 5 internal organs rushed toward the fireball, burning all the way along with the flame. This was a spark that could start a prairie fire. Wherever this ball of raging fire went, that place would become scorching hot, and the cold air from before would immediately be expelled. Before long, Li Yundong felt that his whole body had become extremely hot, and then the chaotic world had also become scorching and dry. This feeling made him feel suffocated, and he wished he could roar and smash the chaotic world into pieces. But Li Yundong clearly felt that his hands and feet were not listening to him. He was like a baby in his mother's womb, struggling desperately, wanting to go to a new world. The more Li Yundong struggled, the stronger and more majestic the power accumulated in his body. It was like a dam storing water ready to burst at any time. After a long time, Li Yundong suddenly heard a crisp popped sound in his ears. It sounded like a bubble that had swollen to the brim. In an instant, in this spirit space, all the senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste and perception suddenly returned to Li Yundong's body. He could control his hands and feet again. He suddenly jumped up and pushed hard with both hands. With a bang, the chaotic world broke apart. Watch net. Suddenly, a stream of clear qi rushed up to the top of Li Yundong's head, and a stream of turbid qi went straight to the lower dantian of his lower abdomen, as if heaven and earth had just been formed. But as soon as the chaotic world was split open by Li Yundong, he suddenly found that a rolling dark cloud had quickly gathered in his spirit space, covering the sky and the earth, and thunder and lightning were rolling in the clouds. With a loud rumble of thunder, a bolt of heavenly thunder heavily struck Li Yundong's body. At this moment, Li Yundong felt that he had lost all his senses again. The junqi in his body was suddenly condensed into a ball, and it returned to the state of a small flame. Li Yundong was shocked. He subconsciously wanted to avoid the terrible heavenly thunder, but then another bolt of lightning struck him. This bolt of lightning was so painful that the blood vessels in his body almost burst, and the breath in his body was almost cut off. But before Li Yundong could catch his breath, thunder rumbled in the sky, and the heavenly thunder fell wildly. The third, fourth, and fifth bolts of lightning struck down in the blink of an eye. The sky and the earth were densely filled with lightning dancing and thunder raging. Li Yundong felt that his whole body was about to be split apart and his soul was about to scatter. Although this spirit space was large, there was no place for him to hide. What should I do? Am I going to be killed here? Li Yundong thought with fear in his heart. I haven't succeeded in the Zhuji phase yet. Su Chan is still waiting for me. But at this moment, a sentence suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. It was the sentence that Su Chan had once said to him, "The way of cultivation is as difficult as ascending to heaven. There is great horror between life and death, between heaven and earth, and between reality and illusion." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly thought, all of this is an illusion. This is my own spirit space. Why am I afraid of this heavenly thunder that doesn't exist? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had the urge to resist and work hard. He shouted, "So what if it's heavenly tribulation? So what if it's heavenly thunder? If you have the ability, come at me. Do you think I'm afraid?" Li Yundong's shout shook the spirit space, and even the heavenly thunder in the sky couldn't suppress it. Li Yundong transformed into a god with 3 heads and 6 arms in the spirit space. Holding all kinds of magical items, he resisted the divine thunder all over the sky and roared again and again. Li Yundong had thought that this was actually just the great horror between reality and illusion. As long as he could defeat these delusions and illusions, he would be able to succeed in the Zhuji phase. But he had never expected that this was actually one of the 3 great horrors of cultivation. The great horror between heaven and earth. Cultivation was something that went against heaven and earth. Therefore, when cultivators were strong to a certain extent, heaven would send down heavenly thunder to destroy such strong cultivators, in order to achieve balance between heaven and earth. Meanwhile, the cultivators who succeeded in the Zhuji realm were constantly fighting against the heavens. Some people hid from the heavenly tribulations, some went through the tribulations, and some fought against the tribulations. However, without exception, all of them wanted to continue their cultivation in life, attempting to obtain the power to surpass the heavens. Why did cultivators like to live in the mountains and go to high places? The reason was revealed in one sentence. The higher you climb, the closer you are to heaven, and the more you can feel the power of heaven. Sometimes, cultivators could borrow this kind of power, but it was very dangerous. If they were not careful, they would backfire. This was like a person who wanted to go against heaven and do illegal things. But even if he did illegal things, he had to wander in front of the police station. If this wasn't arrogance, what was it? If they didn't catch him, who would they catch? Cultivators were like lawbreakers, and heaven was like the police station. In order to cultivate, Li Yundong had climbed so high, just like a lawbreaker wandering in front of the police station. If they didn't catch him, who would they catch? Therefore, the thunder tribulation that Li Yundong encountered in his spirit space was not completely an illusion of his sea of consciousness, but a strange phenomenon caused by the pressure of heaven on his sea of consciousness. Logically speaking, ordinary people would never put themselves in such a harsh and cold place to carry out the Zhuji phase like Li Yundong had done, let alone climb so high. But Ziyuan knew that Li Yundong's heavenly tribulation was imminent, and he would never be able to survive it without a trick. Therefore she took the risk and let Li Yundong go to the most bitter place in the world to cultivate, but she didn't tell him clearly. Taking a trick meant that the risk was greater. If it had been someone else, they might have been doomed. However, Li Yundong accidentally did not feel afraid of the great horror between heaven and earth at all. Instead, he was full of fighting spirit, fighting with heaven and earth and fighting with endless joy. Li Yundong was fighting fiercely with the heavenly thunder in his spirit space. Although his own deity was bombarded by countless heavenly thunder, the more it was bombarded, the more Li Yundong resisted. The more he resisted, the stronger he felt the strength in his body. Even the Yuanyang Jinqi in Li Yundong's body in the spirit space was undergoing the most critical transformation. But at this time, 3 figures appeared on the mountain, all wearing windproof goggles and thick winter clothes. They were holding nails and crutches for climbing in their hands, and they were also wearing thick anti-skid shoes. They were the 2 foreigners and the female tour guide Wuxia, who Li Yundong had met on the way to climb the mountain. One of the foreigners had sharp eyes and saw that there was suddenly a little other color in the snowy world. He pointed at the place where Li Yundong was and shouted, "There seems to be someone there." Another foreigner was holding a handheld camera in his hand. While filming, he looked over and nodded. "Hey, keep your voice down. Just go over and take a look. Don't be too loud or you'll cause an avalanche." The 3 of them came to the pit that Li Yundong had dug and took a look. They were shocked and said in unison, "It's him?" The female tour guide Wuxia saw that the man was covered with a layer of ice and snow. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged. His hands were placed on his legs, his palms facing the sky, and his thumb and ring finger were gently pinched together. Wuxia squatted down, took off her gloves, and put her hand in front of Li Yundong's nose to check his breath. She was shocked. She turned her head and said with a complicated expression, "He's dead." The 2 foreigners drew a cross on their chests at the same time. One of them whispered, "Oh my God! Why did he die in this place?" Another foreigner sighed and said, "Sometimes the Orientals are very strange." Wuxia stared blankly at Li Yundong, who was motionless. Suddenly she felt very complicated in her heart. She sighed but also felt a little happy. "Who told you to show off? Now you want to see if you can show off again?" But as soon as this thought came to her mind, she couldn't help smiling bitterly. "I have no grudge against him. Why do I always hate this guy so much? Forget it. For the sake of our compatriot, let's take his body back." Thinking of this, Wuxia couldn't help reaching out to Li Yundong, wanting to drag him out of the hole. /om/ Chapter 184. Go to watch net. Just as Wuxia reached out to drag Li Yundong out of the cave, the foreigner beside her suddenly said, "Lu, what do you want to do?" Wuxia stopped and looked back at him in confusion. "Of course I want to pull him out and bury him well. Go to watch net. 7 km. The foreigner said in an exaggerated voice, "Lu, do you want to climb the mountain with a corpse? Let's talk about it when we get down the mountain." Another foreigner also nodded and said, "Yes, and I think they might have come to this place on purpose just like Islam and Islam went to Jerusalem. Perhaps dying here is his final destination. Don't disturb him." Wuxia hesitated for a moment, but finally straightened up, put on her gloves again and said, "Then let's continue climbing." Li Yundong, who was in the middle of the Zhuji phase, suddenly didn't know that he had escaped a disaster. If Wuxia pulled him out, it would be equivalent to forcibly destroying his Zhuji phase, and he would never be able to cultivate again in this life. At this time, the Jinqi in Li Yundong's body was like a whirlpool that kept rotating. The main part was gathered in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen, and the qi from the 5 internal organs was like heavenly thunder, violently bombarding the Jinqi in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen. This mass of Jinqi was constantly compressed and condensed by the bombardment. At first it was the size of a watermelon, but it was slowly compressed to the size of a fist, and then it was compressed to a small ball the size of a pigeon's egg. Slowly, the mass of qi, which had been bombarded countless times, was compressed into a small ball the size of a thumb, which was constantly rotating and emitting red light. This was the foundation-building Niden that countless outer sect cultivators dreamed of. There were many cultivation sects in the world, but all of them used the primordial yang fire in their bodies to refine their Niden. However, Li Yundong was the only one who used the power of heaven and earth to refine his body and the power of heavenly thunder to refine his primordial yang. In other words, ordinary cultivators used fire to refine their Niden, but Li Yundong used thunder to refine his Niden. Moreover, in the Tao of the world, lightning was the most exalted. It transcended the 5 elements and stood above all living beings. As soon as this Niden was refined, Li Yundong suddenly felt as if he had endless power in the spirit space. He controlled the 3-headed and 6-armed god in his body and suddenly threw the powerful magical weapon in his hand into the sky. His 6 arms pinched 3 Mahamudra at the same time, which were the Mahavarokana Mahamudra that could destroy all darkness and ignorance. It was the womb realm's mandala light-gathering Buddha top handprint that could break through all obstacles. It was the Vajra Samaya giant palm print that could destroy all demons and devils. As soon as the 3 big handprints were made, the gods in Li Yunyang's spirit space suddenly burst out with dazzling golden light, and 3 colorful halos appeared behind their heads, like Vajra descending to the world and Buddha appearing. Watch net. 7 KOM. The god let out a loud roar and one of his vertical pupils suddenly opened. Divine light shot out from his eyes, along with the magic treasures thrown into the sky and the 3 palm prints shot into the sky. With a loud bang, all the dark clouds in the sky were shattered by the 3 consecutive blows, and the heavenly thunder disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The world in the spirit space suddenly became quiet, leaving only Li Yundong's true god standing upright, looking down at the world with disdain and insufferably arrogant. At this time, Li Yundong's physical body in the spirit space also completed the final Zhuji phase. His eyelids suddenly moved, and the genuine qi in his body was continuously released from the Niden, which was constantly rotating. A strong and hot flow instantly spread through his body, making him restless. When the qi reached the Huagai acupoint on his chest, Li Yundong couldn't help it anymore. He suddenly opened his eyes and jumped up. A stream of qi broke through the Huagai acupoint and went straight to the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. As soon as he raised his head, a long roar like a dragon and a tiger suddenly burst out from his chest. Ah! Although this long roar was not as continuous as the last time when Li Yundong had succeeded in qi refining, the sound was condensed and did not disperse. The sound line was like a steel cable sending it far away. It could still be heard clearly even when it was more than 10 miles away. Li Yundong's long roar lasted for more than 2 minutes. When he stopped, the surging qi in his body calmed down again and slowly flowed to the Niden in his dantian. Li Yundong tried to run the Jinqi in his body. He found that the most obvious change was that the Niden in the dantian under his lower abdomen was like a core. The qi in his whole body was surrounding this Niden, and it was always rushing toward it, causing it to keep rotating. Watch net. 7 KOM. Colorful asterisk rainbow caret asterisk when underscore _% super hashtag speed. In the process of this constant rotation, this Niden kept releasing Jinqi, which rushed to every part of his body along with the Jinqi in his body. It was endless and continuous. Before the Zhuji phase, the aura of the human body was like a group of ownerless farmers. They could go anywhere and live anywhere. When people were in a fighting state, they seemed to have received a unified order and began to pick up weapons and transform into soldiers. But once the war was over, they immediately went back to where they came from and became farmers again. But after people reached the Zhuji phase, cultivators had Niden, which was like a regular army stationed in their bodies all year round, always surrounding and protecting the host, always maintaining a fighting state, and resisting all kinds of external invasions. Farmers lacked autonomy. They could be robbed and occupied. If the owner changed, nothing would happen to them. Therefore, before Li Yundong reached the Zhuji phase, if Su Chan had sex with him, the aura in his body would be unconsciously attracted by Su Chan's aura and spontaneously run into Su Chan's body. In this way, Li Yundong would naturally be empty, and he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of death. However, the regular army had a strong sense of vigilance and danger. They huddled together tightly and were always on guard against external attacks. No one could think of robbing or invading them. They could only be destroyed, not captured. Li Yundong succeeded in the Zhuji phase. After a long roar, he felt like his whole body was filled with endless power. This kind of power did not refer to the strength of his muscles and body, but his internal organs, meridians, blood vessels, and even every strand of his hair was full of vitality. He had never experienced this kind of power before. He felt that his perception was much stronger than before. He could even clearly feel the pressure from the sky above his head, as if there was a pair of cold and majestic eyes in the sky watching him all the time. This feeling made Li Yundong suddenly feel like an official wanted criminal, who would be caught by the heavens at any time. The arrival of heaven's retribution. As soon as this feeling appeared in Li Yundong's heart, he smiled strangely, but he soon heard a dull rumble coming from the distance above his head, as if thunderclouds were rolling and heaven's retribution was imminent. Li Yundong was suddenly shocked. No way? Will heaven's retribution come so fast? He looked up and was immediately dumbfounded. The mountain above his head was rumbling with snow rolling, and the snowflakes were splashing like stormy waves. Damn, an avalanche. Don't tell me it's because of my shout just now. Li Yundong suddenly remembered a movie he had seen before, East Becomes West. In it, Wang Chongyang shouted arrogantly after coming out of cultivation, "I'm already invincible in the world." As a result, a shoe immediately fell from the sky and crushed him to death. Li Yundong's expression became very interesting in an instant. He couldn't help but feel a little crazy. He pointed at the sky and cursed, "See God, I've just reached the Zhuji phase. I'm not invincible in the world yet." I just shouted. "You don't have to play with me like this, do you?" Li Yundong turned around and was about to run, but suddenly, 3 panicked figures ran quickly not far away. They were the 2 foreigners and the female tour guide, Wuxia. The 2 foreigners had never expected that there would be an avalanche when they were climbing the mountain. They were so scared that they peed their pants and subconsciously ran back. However, how could human legs run faster than the speed of an avalanche? While the female tour guide, Wuxia, was running away in a hurry, she suddenly saw a figure out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head and saw Li Yundong standing not far away, staring blankly at the avalanche on the top of the mountain. Wuxia immediately stopped and laughed bitterly. "It's over. I'm dead this time. I actually saw a phantom. The dead actually came back to life again? Alas, this is retribution. I shouldn't have fought with him in the first place." She stopped. Seeing that Wuxia had stopped, the 2 foreigners next to her also stopped subconsciously. They followed Wuxia's gaze and were also shocked. God, isn't he dead? As soon as they stopped, the avalanche on the top of the mountain hit them in the blink of an eye. At first, the avalanche was far away like the waves on the sea, but at this time, it had already reached their heads. The rumbling sound suppressed all the sounds in the world. They opened their mouths and shouted, but their voices were instantly buried. At this time, Li Yundong also noticed them and his heart suddenly shook. Li Yundong knew that this avalanche was caused by him. He could escape with his strong skills, but what about these guys who were climbing the mountain? Wouldn't it be a tragedy? Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. Should I leave them alone, turn around and run away, or save them? But what if I save them? How can I save them? Can I save them? I don't want to lose myself as soon as I reach the Zhuji phase. But on second thought, Li Yundong wondered why he had cultivated. When he saw injustice on the road, he could still pull out a knife to help, regardless of his own safety. Why did he become hesitant after he succeeded in reaching the Zhuji phase and became stronger? What's more, he was the one who had caused this. Li Yundong took a deep breath, and without any hesitation in his heart, the Niden in his lower abdomen began to roll quickly like a hot fireball, constantly gushing out the purest and most condensed Jindan's primordial qi. With a stomp of his feet, he instantly appeared in front of the 3 people. His 5 fingers flew, his hands were tied, his 2 middle fingers were erected, and his thumbs were crossed like lotus leaves. It was the fixed fundamental mudra. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he let out a low shout, bang! Then, the fixed fundamental mudra in his hand was pushed up. In an instant, it was as if a golden qi wall had suddenly been pushed out in front of Li Yundong, forcibly blocking the fierce avalanche less than 2 meters in front of him. The rolling snow was suddenly blocked in one place, but the avalanche on both sides roared down, passing by the 2 foreigners and Wuxia like a waterfall. The 2 foreigners only saw Li Yundong push with both hands, and the avalanche was forcibly blocked into a wall, and it was getting higher and higher. The scene was even more exaggerated than a Hollywood stunt. They couldn't help but widen their eyes and their scalps went numb with shock. Who the hell is this guy? /om/. Chapter 185. Go to watch net. Jack and Ruby were 2 mountaineering enthusiasts. Of course, they knew that when climbing such a snowy mountain, they were most afraid of encountering an avalanche. Generally, in such a situation, unless rescue was organized immediately, they would definitely die. Watch net. However, the probability of an avalanche was very low. It was unlikely that they would encounter one, but they never expected that they would actually encounter one. Furthermore, this avalanche was man-made. However, something even more ridiculous than the avalanche happened. There was actually someone who forcefully blocked the natural might of the avalanche with his own physical strength. The three of them were dumbfounded. Before they could react, Li Yundong jumped more than 10 meters away. After a few more jumps, he disappeared from their line of sight. But not long after, Li Yundong jumped back a few times and took a rectangular object that was nearly the height of a person from the snow cave where he had been staying. He carried it on his back and then he jumped a few more times and left in an instant. It was not until a long time after Li Yundong had left that the three of them reacted. Jesus Christ, isn't this too amazing? Jack the foreigner said while stuttering. The foreigner, Ruby, who was holding the camera with his body still stiff, also stuttered, Lou, I know your China is a very magical place, but this is too exaggerated. As he spoke, his voice involuntarily became a little louder. Immediately, a few cracks appeared on the artificial snow wall in front of him. Jack and Wuxia immediately rushed over and covered his mouth. Wuxia lowered her voice and said, if you have anything to say, let's talk after we get down the mountain. The foreigner, Jack, nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. For a moment, the three hoodlums didn't dare to take another breath. They quietly descended the mountain like thieves. After Li Yundong went down the mountain first, he ran wildly with a guilty conscience. It was not until he was far away from the mountain that he took a breath and stopped. Watch net. Rainbow * asterisk literature _ learning % super # speed. Update. He wandered alone on the Qinghai Tibetan plateau. Suddenly he succeeded in building his foundation, but he did not know what to do next. It was as if he was in the vast wilderness and did not know where to go. At this time, Li Yundong suddenly thought of Ziyuan. Didn't she say that when he succeeded in the Zhuji phase she would automatically come to find him? Carrying the fan of 7 treasures on his back, Li Yundong looked around blankly. Just as he was in a daze, he suddenly felt a needle-like feeling on his back, as if someone was hiding in the dark and coveting him. He turned his head abruptly and saw a Land Rover parked on the side of the road not far away. A young man and a young woman were sitting in the car. It was the young man and woman who had been peeping at him when he had met Meduo and Changbajila. The woman was dressed fashionably and coquettishly. She was wearing a pair of purple sunglasses. At first glance, her waterfall-like black hair and beautiful oval face were very attractive. The man was wearing an open-sleeved pink long-sleeved shirt and a pair of sunglasses that Jackie Chan loved the most. He looked very cool. When the man saw Li Yundong looking at him, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He turned his head and whispered a few words in the ear of the woman next to him. The woman smiled charmingly at the man, kissed him gently on the face, and then put her arms around the man's neck. The two of them got out of the car as if they were joined together. The man put his arms around the coquettish woman's waist and slowly walked toward Li Yundong. As he walked, he tilted his head and looked at Li Yundong. When he was 10 meters away from Li Yundong, he took off his sunglasses, revealing a pair of rather frivolous eyes. When his eyes fell on the back of the fan of 7 treasures behind Li Yundong, there was a strong sense of greed and envy in his eyes. Li Yundong was secretly vigilant. He held his breath and stared at the man in front of him without saying a word. He was as silent as a majestic mountain. The coquettish woman next to the man also looked at Li Yundong curiously, and from time to time, there was a coquettish and seductive look in her eyes. I'm Wu Hao from the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhuang. Wu Hao smiled frivolously, let go of the woman's waist and cupped his hands. The woman next to him also giggled and said with a coquettish face, I'm LV Fengping from the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua. Go to see the net. 7 KOM. Li Yundong calmly cupped his hands and returned the salute. Nice to meet you. What can I do for you too? Wu Hao held a pair of sunglasses in one hand and knocked them on the palm of his other hand. His body was crooked and slanted. He did not look like a cultivator at all, but more like a hooligan. He said, it's nothing. I just heard a long roar coming from afar. My partner, LV Fengping, and I heard the sound and knew that someone had succeeded in the Zhuji phase here, so we came to take a look. I didn't expect to meet an acquaintance on the way. Li Yundong said lightly, so that's how it is. It's really a coincidence. Can I go now? Seeing that Li Yundong didn't want to see him, Wu Hao was secretly unhappy, but he suppressed his unhappiness and said, don't be in such a hurry to leave. I have a deal to make with you. Are you interested? I'm not interested, Li Yundong said flatly without hesitation. The sentence made Wu Hao choke. He said angrily, I haven't said anything yet and you don't know what it is. Why did you refuse? That's not very polite, is it? Li Yundong snorted coldly, opened his hands and looked himself up and down. I am alone in the world. Except for a worldly thing, there is nothing that can attract your attention unless. Li Yundong glanced at the coquettish woman next to Wu Hao, and a sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Unless you want to help the woman next to you rape me? Wu Hao's face suddenly darkened, but LV Fengping, who was next to him, giggled. Her voice was dissolute and she didn't care at all. Instead, there was a hint of provocation in her eyes. Wu Hao stared at Li Yundong for a while with a gloomy face, but after a while he relaxed his expression and said with a smile, I won't argue with you. I just want to ask you, will you sell the fan of 7 treasures behind you? Li Yundong saw that the man had seen through the origin of the treasure fan behind him as soon as he opened his mouth. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart and thought to himself, how did he know? Li Yundong shouted resolutely, no. Wu Hao was unwilling to give up. I'll pay 5 million for your fan of 7 treasures. Will you sell it? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he sucked in a breath of cold air. 5 million. 5 million meant that a person could basically solve the most difficult problems of housing and livelihood in this life. He could buy 2 or 3 houses and live a comfortable life as a landlord. This was the kind of life that Li Yundong had longed for the most in the past. However, Li Yundong knew that he had changed. It was impossible for him to go back to the situation where he could eat his fill and worry about his family. Moreover, this was a gift from Su Chan. To him it was a priceless treasure. How could he sell it? Li Yundong snorted coldly. 5 million? I won't sell it even for 50 million. Wu Hao frowned and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. But he still patiently said, Fellow Taoist, I see that you are a kindred spirit. That's why I'm willing to discuss it with you. If you think that my price is too low, why don't you name a price? Everything is negotiable. If 5 million won't do, then what about 10 million? What, not even 10 million? Then 20 million, I can't go any higher. Li Yundong saw that Wu Hao had raised the price to 20 million in the blink of an eye, and he sneered. Don't waste your time. I will never sell this fan of 7 treasures. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Hao hugged LV Fengping and laughed wildly. I said it could be the fan of 7 treasures, didn't I? You still don't believe me? What do you think? Let me try it out. LV Fengping smiled coquettishly. Yes, you are still the best, you devil. Wu Hao's face, which had been suppressing his anger, became arrogant and domineering. He raised his chin, sneered and said, Boy, you are too inexperienced to fight with me. Let me tell you, if you know what's good for you, obediently sell this fan of 7 treasures to me, and I will still give you 5 million. Otherwise humphed. Li Yundong was born arrogant. He could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. Others were arrogant, but he was even more arrogant than them. He smiled coldly and said, Otherwise what? Wu Hao sneered. Otherwise, it will be a pity for your cultivation skills which have just reached the Zhuji phase. You will die here as soon as you step on the road of cultivation. Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and was about to speak, but he saw LV Fengping flirtatiously winking at Li Yundong and saying coquettishly, Oh little brother, why do you have to fight for such a dead thing? My devil is very fierce when he gets angry and you have just reached the Zhuji phase, so you are no match for him. You see, we are not going to rob you of your treasures. Aren't we talking about the price with you? 5 million is too little. He's such a stingy person. How about 10 million? How about it? 10 million isn't a small amount, is it? It's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. Wu Hao, who was standing to one side, pinched LV Fengping's breasts hard and said with a smile, You bitch, you are actually speaking for an outsider. I think you have taken a fancy to him. You really want to rape him, don't you? LV Fengping wriggled in Wu Hao's arms and said coquettishly, You devil, how dare you say that to me? Be careful, I will bite off your ugly thing when we get back. Wu Hao snorted and said, If you want to rape me, then just do it. I don't mind. As he said this, he looked at Li Yundong frivolously and said, Hey, 10 million plus this woman, how about that? Is that enough sincerity? I see that you are still a virgin. After you have a taste of her kung fu, you will know what the most despicable thing in the world is. Li Yundong looked at Wu Hao and LV Fengping's ugly behavior coldly and felt disgusted in his heart. He snorted coldly and said, Are you finished? If you are, then get out of here. Don't stand here and dirty my eyes and ears. You think shamelessness is fun? Bah. After that, he spat heavily on the ground. Wu Hao suddenly became furious and his face twisted. He pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "Little bastard, I gave you face but you don't want it. I will tell you again, hand over the treasured fan, and I will spare your life. /OM/." Chapter 186. Go to watch net. After Wu Hao shouted, Li Yundong was still unmoved. He looked at the man and woman in front of him coldly and suddenly sneered. "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" He patted the fan of 7 treasures behind him and said, "The thing is here. Come and get it if you have the ability. If you don't have the ability, get out of here. Don't talk nonsense here. Can you kill me with words?" Li Yundong's words made Wu Hao so angry that his face turned purple. With a loud shout, he swung his arm and 5 red balls rolled out of his long sleeve. The balls were surrounded by a blood-red light, as if thick blood was lingering around them. From a distance, Li Yundong could smell the smell of blood blowing in his face. Go to watch net. 7K/Li Yundong suddenly froze. He knew that this must be his opponent's powerful magical weapon, but he didn't know what it was used for and how he could resist it. Li Yundong knew that although the other party wanted to take the treasure and was very arrogant, they were right about one thing. He had just reached the Zhuji phase, so he didn't know if he could beat them. Li Yundong took a deep breath, and the Naiden in his lower abdomen began to spin wildly, ready to burst out the surging Jindan's qi at any time. Wu Hao laughed grimly. He held the 5 red blood beads in the air with one hand, pointed at Li Yundong with the other, and said, "I'll ask you one last time. If you know what's good for you, hurry up and hand over the fan of 7 treasures. Otherwise, under my 5 yang blood beads, I promise that even your bones will be turned into ashes." Li Yundong stared at Wu Hao coldly, then glanced at LV Fengping out of the corner of his eye. The woman didn't take out her powerful magical weapon. Her eyes were flashing as she watched the situation on the field. She had one hand on her waist and the other behind her back, as if she would pull out some powerful magical weapon at any time. 1 against 2 is already a disadvantage, not to mention that the other party's cultivation may be higher than mine. Li Yundong thought quickly and secretly made up his mind. "No, I must make the first move." Li Yundong pretended to be shocked and frightened as he looked at the 5 young blood pearl floating in the palm of the other party. He said in a trembling voice, "What is this thing? Why is it so scary?" Wu Hao said proudly, "Humph, you have good eyes. Let me tell you, the origin of this magic treasure of mine will scare you to death." Before Wu Hao could finish his words, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, which were bursting with divine light. He suddenly stamped his feet and his feet touched the ground. His body was like a violent wave and he rushed toward Wu Hao. Watch net. 7KOM. Rainbow caret asterisk literature underscore learning % super hashtag speed. Update. Li Yundong's body had been reconstructed by the Jindan, and his physical strength was even stronger than that of many people who had entered the Tao through martial arts. In addition, after a month of polishing, he had become even more powerful. When he broke out, it was as if the whole turf under his feet was going to be lifted up. His figure was as mighty as a wave and his strength was like a flood. Wu Hao had never expected that Li Yundong would attack without warning, and that he would attack so fiercely. Although he was an inner disciple of Mount Wuhua, he had been soaked in medicinal water and fed with elixirs by his master since he was a child. He had reached the 5th level of Shintong at a young age, but he had taken the path of yin-yang dual cultivation of the Eastern Taoist sect. The Naiden in his body had been obtained through sexual dual cultivation with LV Fengping. Although such a Naiden was easier to cultivate and faster, after all, it could not be compared with the Naiden that ordinary cultivators had refined in hard cultivation, let alone the Naiden that Li Yundong had tempered with the divine power of heavenly thunder. Such a Naiden, which had been cultivated through sexual dual cultivation, was often contemptuously called a fake Naiden by cultivators of other sects. When encountering a strong person, it would be defeated with one blow. It was easy for Wu Hao to get his Naiden, and it was also easy for him to get his Kung Fu. Moreover, most of his Kung Fu was Taoist magic, so he had never learned any close combat skills. Seeing that Li Yundong had rushed in front of him in the blink of an eye, Wu Hao suddenly rose up, turned his hand and slapped down on the top of his head. This palm wind was fierce. If it hit, the top of his head would definitely be broken and he would die miserably on the spot. Before cultivators had cultivated to the Jinshin phase, They would still die if their vital parts were hit by an ordinary person, let alone a cultivator with amazing divine power like Li Yundong. Wu Hao was so scared that his hair stood on end. He let out a strange cry and retreated like crazy. As he retreated, he screamed at LV Fengping, "What the F***ck are you doing there? Hurry up and do it." Before LV Fengping could come to her senses, Li Yundong had stuck to Wu Hao like a maggot attached to a bone. Wu Hao retreated quickly, but Li Yundong chased him even faster. Li Yundong only chased after him for 3 steps before he caught up with Wu Hao again. His 5 fingers were like hooks pinching Wu Hao's neck. Go to CNET. 7K/Wu Hao was terrified. Because the attack range of the 5 yang blood bead in his hand was too large, he didn't dare to release it for fear of hurting himself. Li Yundong grabbed his neck and lifted him up like a chicken. At this time LV Fengping screamed and pulled out a dark red whip from behind her. She shouted in panic, "Let him go." Li Yundong sneered and said, "Let him go? If I let him go, will you let me go?" Wu Hao felt as if his neck had been tightly gripped by an iron clamp, and he couldn't even breathe. His face suddenly turned purple and he said with difficulty, "Shameless, shameless, how dare you sneak attack me?" Li Yundong glanced at him coldly and didn't want to talk nonsense with him. He asked, "Do you want to live or die?" Wu Hao snorted and his eyes kept rolling in his eye sockets, full of resentment. However, LV Fengping said anxiously, "Put him down. We can talk about it." Although both of them were cultivators who had cultivated to the Shintong realm, they were caught off guard when they suddenly encountered an unreasonable cultivator like Li Yundong, who fought hand-to-hand as soon as he came up. Seeing that Wu Hao had been restrained in the blink of an eye, LV Fengping suddenly became cautious. After all, no matter how fast the magic was, it was not as fast as the speed of 5 fingers pinching. Li Yundong glanced at LV Fengping coldly and said, "What do you have to say? If I let him go, will you leave obediently?" LV Fengping's previous coquettishness was gone. She took a deep breath, and the anxiety on her face gradually disappeared. She said seriously, "If we want to blame someone, we can only blame ourselves for being wrong. We thought that you were a cultivator who had just reached the Zhuji phase and had no Shintong or Dharma power. That's why we were greedy. If you are willing to let him go, we will leave right now. There will be no hesitation." Li Yundong narrowed his eyes and glanced sharply at LV Fengping's face. Seeing that her expression did not seem to be fake, he turned to Wu Hao and said coldly, "What about you?" Seeing that Li Yundong had the intention to let him go, Wu Hao also took a deep breath in a low voice and said, "I was blind and offended Jinren. Please forgive me." Although Li Yundong had already set foot in the cultivation world, he was not a homicidal maniac after all. He had not expected to kill these 2 people here. Seeing that the other side had admitted defeat, he loosened his 5 fingers and shouted, "Get out of here." Wu Hao's neck was suddenly released, and he suddenly felt as if he had returned to heaven from hell. He bent down, took 2 deep breaths and then staggered 2 steps. When he was a certain distance away from Li Yundong, he turned his head and looked at him. Suddenly, a trace of hatred flashed in his eyes. Seeing the killing intent in his eyes, Li Yundong immediately glared at him, and his eyes burst with divine light. His appearance was really murderous and extremely frightening. Although Wu Hao had Niden, his will was not firm. Being stared at by Li Yundong, he suddenly trembled with fear. He quickly turned his head, not daring to look at Li Yundong again, and turned to run toward LV Fengping. LV Fengping supported the embarrassed Wu Hao. She looked at Li Yundong, who had turned away with a cold snort and a complicated look in her eyes. She said in a low voice, "Forget it, we admit defeat this time. Let's go." Wu Hao looked at Li Yundong's back coldly, gritted his teeth and said, "No, it was just a sneak attack. His dermic powers are not higher than the 2 of us. Besides, you can bear such a great shame, but I can't." After saying that, he raised the 5 dark red 5 yang blood beads in his hand and pointed them at Li Yundong's back. He shouted, "Go." With a swoosh, a blood-red 5 yang blood bead suddenly broke through the air and rushed toward Li Yundong. Although Li Yundong's back was facing Wu Hao and the others, he suddenly felt a sharp pain on his back. He was shocked, and before he could react, he was hit hard on his back. With a bang, the 5 yang blood bead turned into a flame in the blink of an eye. Countless ghosts jumped out of the flame and swallowed Li Yundong in an instant. Wu Hao let out a wild laugh. "Who asked you to be so arrogant? Who asked you to be so ruthless? In the end, you still obediently got burned by my 5 sun blood pearl. Not only can my 5 yang blood flower bead burn your flesh, but the vengeful spirits within it can also devour your soul. Enjoy it. LV Fengping also giggled and said, "It's a pity that the fan of 7 treasures will be burned to ashes in a while." But as soon as her voice fell, she suddenly heard a loud shout from the flame, and a gust of wind blew. Although Li Yundong was hit in the back, the 5 yang blood bead happened to hit the fan of 7 treasures. The fan of 7 treasures was made of black iron and could only be refined by Samadhi true fire for 49 days. In addition, its whole body was engraved with the Vajra Sutra, so its Buddhist power was amazing, and it was dignified and solemn. The thick chi of blood corpses and ghosts emitted by the 5 yang blood bead could not invade it at all. Li Yundong endured the pain of being burned by the flames around him. He grabbed the iron fan with a backhand, twisted his waist, and the iron fan opened with a clang and fanned with all his might. This fanning seemed to have sucked out the air around him in an instant, and the flames became much smaller with a whoosh. The solemn Vajra characters on the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures looked like a layer of golden Buddha wherever they passed. The ghosts were so frightened that they screamed and fled in all directions, not daring to get close to Li Yundong at all. Li Yundong spun the fan several times in a row, and the fan of 7 treasures in his hand turned like a wheel. His whole body was shrouded in a layer of black light. In the blink of an eye, the flames were fanned out by him, and the ghosts were also expelled without a trace. Wu Hao and LV Fengping were stunned and speechless for a moment. They had never thought that the 5 yang blood bead, which was extremely powerful and domineering in their eyes, would be destroyed by a boy who had just reached the Zhuji phase. After Li Yundong put out the fire and drove away the ghosts, he rushed toward Wu Hao and LV Fengping angrily. With a loud roar, he said with a murderous look, "You're courting death, /om/." Chapter 187. Go to watch net. The magical item he was most proud of had been easily broken. Wu Hao panicked for a moment. He couldn't help but take a few steps back as if he wanted to turn around and run away. He didn't dare to fight with Li Yundong again. Go to watch net. However, LV Fengping, who looked very coquettish, had a bit of backbone. She gritted her teeth and swung the dark red whip in her hand. With a swish, it was like a poisonous snake, aiming at Li Yundong's eyes. Li Yundong didn't even look at it. Relying on the domineering fan of 7 treasures in his hand, he shook his wrist, and the fan of 7 treasures suddenly twisted the whip like a big iron pillar. Then he lowered his waist, exerted his strength with both hands and shouted, "Let go!" LV Fengping only felt a terrifying strange force. The whip in her hand was violently pulled out and was about to fall out of her hand in an instant. She was shocked and horrified, but this was her magical item. How could she let go and let others take it away so easily? LV Fengping didn't let go. With a shout, the tip of the whip in her hand suddenly turned into a dark red snake head, biting towards Li Yundong's wrist. If Li Yundong was bitten, he would be poisoned and die within 3 seconds. Li Yundong snorted, shook his wrist, and immediately let go of the fan of 7 treasures. The snake head that the whip had turned into also bit nothing. However, the force of Li Yundong's wrist shake violently threw LV Fengping up with the whip, and she fell to the ground with a bang. When Li Yundong took the fan of 7 treasures again, he happened to be at the other end of the fan, avoiding the threat of the whip head. He roared and smashed the tail of the fan toward LV Fengping's head, who was lying on the ground. The fan of 7 treasures weighed more than 50 kilograms, and the tail was like an iron rod as thick as an arm. If it hit LV Fengping, her head would definitely burst and she would die on the spot. This made Wu Hao and LV Fengping scream at the same time. "Stop!" Wu Hao shouted hoarsely. At this time, Li Yundong was angry, and with the lesson just now, he was unwilling to show mercy. He laughed grimly in his heart, and the fan of 7 treasures in his hand did not hesitate at all. Instead, it became faster and faster, and he slashed down hard. Just as the treasured fan was about to hit LV Fengping's head, a hand suddenly appeared and caught Li Yundong's iron fan. The person who had suddenly intervened made Li Yundong stunned. He took a closer look and saw that the man was wearing a dark yellow robe and a red cassock, revealing a strong and muscular arm. He was dressed like a llama. Watch net. This person was Dorji Tenzin, who had been following Li Yundong all the way. After blocking Li Yundong's iron fan, Dorji Tenzin shook his hand and threw Li Yundong's iron fan away. Then he put his palms together, bowed and said in a somewhat stiff Chinese voice, "Namo Amitabha, This is the holy land of Tibetan Buddhism. How can we kill under the nose of Buddha? Seeing that the monk had blocked Li Yundong's fierce attack as soon as he appeared, Wu Hao's eyes lit up. He rolled his eyes and immediately cried out before Li Yundong could, "Master, it's great that you came. You have to uphold justice for us." Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and glanced at him sharply. "Oh? What happened?" Wu Hao was shameless. He knelt down in front of Dorji Tenzin and cried and shouted, "We were tourists who came here to travel. We met this gangster on the way. He saw that my wife was beautiful and wanted to molest her. Although we have practiced some kung fu, we are still no match for this guy. Look at how my wife has been bullied by him." Dorji Tenzin turned his head and saw that LV Fengping's hair was messy and she was sitting on the ground in horror, as if she had just been ravaged. LV Fengping also came to her senses and understood Wu Hao's intention. She said with a sad face, crying, "Master, thank you for saving me. Otherwise, I would have died in the hands of this villain." Li Yundong looked coldly at the two guys who were putting the blame on him. He was so angry that he burst out laughing. Watch net. 7KOM. As a Buddhist disciple, Dorji Tenzin had been chosen as the guardian Vajra since he was a child, so his sense of justice was extremely strong. He suddenly became furious and raised his head to shout at Li Yunyang, "I came here on the order of the abbot to ask you to return the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra. I wanted to persuade you with kind words, but I didn't expect you to be such a shameless villain. I, Dorji Tenzin, have no choice but to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and subdue the demons today." Li Yundong sneered and said, "It sounds so nice. What, do you want to fight 3 against 1? Wu Hao was overjoyed. He hurriedly urged, "Master, you don't need to talk about Jianghu morality when dealing with this kind of villain. My wife and I also know a little kung fu. We can help a little." Li Yundong sneered. However, Dorji Tenzin's face turned serious and he said in a deep voice, "No, you two leave quickly. As the guardian of the sect, I naturally have to eradicate this kind of evil demon." Wu Hao smiled apologetically and said, "Master, you are really noble and unquestionable, but this villain is not so easy to deal with." Dorji Tenzin had grown up in the temple all year round. Although he was honest and simple, he was not pedantic. When he saw that Wu Hao's eyebrows were full of frivolity and LV Fengping's face was obviously coquettish, he subconsciously felt a little disgusted with the two of them. He immediately shouted rudely, "There's no need to say anything more. I, Dorji Tenzin, am not someone who bullies others and fights with more people." Wu Hao's face suddenly changed when he was shouted at by Dorji Tenzin. He took 2 steps back in embarrassment and stared at Dorji Tenzin's back. His eyes were gloomy and he sneered in his heart, "This stupid monk who hasn't even reached the Zhuji phase wants to fight with this guy? Isn't he courting death?" He winked at LV Fengping beside him, but LV Fengping pulled Wu Hao's sleeve and said in a very low voice, "Forget it, we'll admit defeat this time. This person is not easy to deal with." Wu Hao also said in a low voice, "What nonsense are you talking about? I was too proud just now. I don't believe that I can't kill this guy after I use all the blood beads of the 4 departments and 5 sons." LV Fengping bit her lip and said worriedly, "You used all 4 beads. How much effort did we put in to refine these 5 blood beads last time?" Wu Hao snorted and looked greedily at the fan of 7 treasures in Li Yunyang's hand. He said, "As long as we can get the fan of 7 treasures, these 4 blood beads are nothing. You saw it just now. This guy is already so powerful without knowing how to use this magic item. How powerful will he be after he recognizes him as his master?" There was still a trace of worry in LV Fengping's eyes. "But I always feel that it's very dangerous." Wu Hao looked at her unhappily and said, "Nonsense, how can it not be dangerous to kill people and take their treasures? What can you do if you are so wishy-washy? Later you will support me from the side. When this stupid monk makes a move, we will immediately take action and kill the monk as well." LV Fengping was shocked. "You want to kill this monk as well? Aren't you afraid of offending the esoteric sect?" Most of the Lama sect's disciples cultivated secret methods, so they were also called esoteric sect in the cultivation world. They were a powerful force that could not be underestimated. If they were targeted by this cultivation sect, Wu Hao and LV Fengping knew very well that it would be a very terrible thing. Wu Hao glared at LV Fengping and said in a low voice, "Are you stupid? If this monk spreads the news that we got the fan of 7 treasures, we will be in trouble." LV Fengping did not speak, but her eyes were still full of hesitation and worry. She opened her mouth and wanted to persuade Wu Hao again, but she saw that the man's eyes were burning with greed. She knew that it was useless to say anything. Li Yundong saw that Wu Hao and LV Fengping were whispering to each other and glancing at him from time to time. He knew that they must have evil intentions and were up to no good. Li Yundong was secretly vigilant. He slowly opened the fan of 7 treasures in front of him. Every time he opened a fan leaf, there was a clanging sound, like a long sword coming out of its sheath, and the sound was sonorous and powerful. When Dorji Tenzin saw that Li Yundong's fan of 7 treasures was covered with golden Sanskrit characters, he suddenly widened his eyes and said, "How can you have such a Buddhist treasure in your hands?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "What, do you want to rob it too?" Dorji Tenzin's expression became serious. He put his palms together and took a deep breath. "Humph, how could an evil person like you have such a Buddhist treasure? I think you must have robbed it. The Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra is the treasure of my esoteric sect. You must return it. As for this treasure, it won't be too late for me to return it when I find out the owner." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You really know how to be a good person." After he finished laughing, he shouted, "If you have the ability, come and take it." With a loud shout, Dorji Tenzin slapped Li Yundong with his palm. As soon as he slapped out, his palm turned blood red, and a blazing heat rushed toward his face. This was one of the 3 unique mudras of the esoteric sect, the devil-subduing mudra. There were 3 mudras in the esoteric sect, namely the devil-subduing mudra, the Ganges mudra, and the mantra mudra. Among them, the devil-subduing mudra was inclined to the external palm technique in martial arts. When practiced to the peak, the palm could emit a strong wind, which could be used to subdue demons and protect the sect. Dorji Tenzin was an expert in this field. The Ganges mudra was inclined to the Buddhist Dharma. It aimed to use all kinds of mudra to eliminate disasters and save all living beings. It emphasized the Buddhist Dharma and despised the human body, so it did not have much fighting effect. Seeing Dorji Tenzin's devil-subduing mudra coming toward him, Li Yundong snorted coldly. Just as he was about to fight back, he saw a black shadow pass by Dorji Tenzin in an instant and pounce on him. Li Yundong took a closer look and found that the whip in LV Fengping's hand had been thrown out first. The tip of the whip turned into a dark red snake head. It spat out its tongue, opened its poisonous fangs and bit toward Li Yundong. At the same time, Wu Hao also laughed grimly. With a flick of his fingers, 4 5-yang blood beads fiercely hit Li Yundong's head, chest and abdomen. The other one was aimed at Dorji Tenzin's back. For a moment, the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the aureole behind. The devil-subduing mudra, the viper whip, and the fierce 5-yang blood bead attacked from all directions, blocking all the ways for Li Yundong to dodge. /om/ Chapter 188. Go to watch net. In the face of attacks from all directions, Li Yundong did not panic at all. His will had long been tempered like steel. At this critical moment of life and death, he stimulated endless fighting spirit and fighting talent. Go to watch net. He took a step back with his right foot and then he turned around. The fan of 7 treasures in his hand instantly closed with a swoosh. He swung the head of the fan and hit the tip of the whip in front of him. With a crisp snap, the snake head that the whip had transformed into crashed into the fan of 7 treasures. With a muffled bang, it was forcefully smashed away. In particular, the moment the snake head crashed into the fan of 7 treasures, the treasured fan suddenly emitted a burst of golden light. The golden Sanskrit characters on the treasured fan suddenly lit up and released an incomparably powerful and dignified force that shook the snake head and instantly returned to its original form. With a flick of his wrist, Li Yundong repelled the first whip that had come at him. Then he turned around and opened the treasured fan in his hand with a clang. In an instant, it was as if a black iron wall had appeared in front of him, blocking him from the wind. Li Yundong waved his hand at the 3 5-yang blood beads that were rotating at high speed. Whoosh! A violent gust of wind rose from the ground, and the 3 5-yang blood beads were immediately bounced back by the strong wind. Taking advantage of this movement, Li Yundong threw the fan of 7 treasures in his hand into the sky. His empty hands quickly pinched a Mahamudra, and the Yuanyang genuine qi in his body surged out of the Mahamudra. It was the Mahamudra of Vairocana, which did not carry a trace of evil qi all over his body. The exorcism mudra practiced by Dorji Tenzin was a fighting move, while the mantra Mahamudra cultivated by Li Yundong was a supreme protection magic. It was obvious which one was stronger and which one was weaker. When Dorji Tenzin saw Li Yundong's Mahavirokana mudra coming toward him, he was shocked and could hardly believe his eyes. How could such an evil person cultivate such a pure and powerful mantra Mahamudra without a trace of evil chi? How is this possible? Dorji Tenzin barely put his hands in front of his chest to block it, and he was hit away by the Mahavarokana Mudra. Watch net. Just as his body was sent flying, he managed to dodge Wu Hao's sneak attack from behind. It was the 5-yang blood flower pearl. Dorji Tenzin dodged the sneak attack, and the 5-yang blood pearl went straight to Li Yunyang. At this time, the fan of 7 treasures in Li Yundong's hand was flying in the air again. He had no weapon to resist, so he was about to be hit. However, Li Yundong did not panic in the face of danger. An idea came to him. He took a deep breath and spat out a fierce, condensed and vigorous qi from his mouth. In the past, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, although the breath was long and vigorous, it might not be condensed. But at this time, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, he could condense all the breath into a thin line like a strand of hair and blow it right on the 5-yang blood bead. Previously, Li Yundong had used the fan of 7 treasures to fan the 3 5-yang blood beads toward Wu Hao. This time, Wu Hao was scared out of his wits and hurriedly tried to catch the 3 5-yang blood beads. However, the 5-yang blood beads were rotating at a high speed. If he was not careful, the blood beads would immediately explode and swallow Wu Hao. However, Wu Hao was, after all, a disciple of a famous sect. With a somersault, he dodged one of the 5-yang blood beads by a hair's breadth. Then he caught the other 2 5-yang blood beads with his 2 hands. His body spun on the spot like a spinning top, and the 5-yang blood beads in his palms were also spinning. As long as he stopped his strength, the blood beads would immediately explode. His move was beautiful and wonderful, but he had not expected that Li Yundong's reaction would be even more beautiful and wonderful than his. He actually blew another 5-yang blood bead back in one breath. When Wu Hao saw the 5-yang blood bead coming straight at him, he was scared out of his wits. It was too late for him to dodge, so he had no choice but to copy Li Yundong's method. He took a deep breath and spat at the 5-yang blood bead that was coming at him at high speed. At this moment, the difference between a Jindan and a Pseudo-Dan was obvious. Li Yundong's breath was condensed like a thread, but it was as hard as steel. It forcibly spat out the blood bead and sent it flying back. However, although Wu Hao's breath was strong, it was scattered and not condensed. He only slightly blocked the momentum of the blood bead, and the 5-yang blood bead hit Wu Hao's body. In the blink of an eye, Wu Hao's entire body had turned into a burning ball of fire. He abruptly let out a miserable howl of pain. Just as his scream left his throat, it was immediately drowned out by the wailing of the vengeful spirits and malicious ghosts inside the 5-yang blood flower pearl. His Yin spirit didn't even have time to escape before it was completely devoured by the vengeful spirits. LV Fengping, who was beside him, suddenly screamed. Although she was dissolute and fickle as a Taoist companion, she had true feelings for Wu Hao. Especially when she saw her man being destroyed in body and soul, LV Fengping suddenly rushed toward Li Yundong like crazy. Go to see net. 7K, O-Li Yundong saw her face twisting and rushing toward him regardless of anything. Her 5 fingers were like hooks, and there was a faint blue light on her fingertips. Although her momentum was fierce and her appearance was terrible, he sneered in his heart. He took another step back and dodged LV Fengping's fierce claw. At this time, LV Fengping had lost her mind. Her mind was full of revenge for Wu Hao. As a cultivator, it was not terrible to have their bodies destroyed because they could still get their Yin spirits out of their bodies and find a way to regenerate or reincarnate to cultivate again. But if their bodies and souls were destroyed, it would really be a tragedy, and they could even be called tableware. LV Fengping's fingernails were blue and glossy, and they were dipped in highly toxic poison. As long as she scratched a little skin, she could immediately poison people to death. Li Yundong had not cultivated to the realm of Yin spirit out of his body. As long as she scratched him, he would undoubtedly die. He wouldn't even have the chance to regenerate or reincarnate. LV Fengping missed the first claw. Just as she was about to scratch again, she suddenly heard a violent whistling sound coming from above her head. She subconsciously raised her head and saw that the fan of 7 treasures that Li Yundong had thrown into the sky had fallen at this time. Taking advantage of the moment she raised her head, Li Yundong quickly pinched the lion seal in his hand and spat out a mantra, Ma. This mantra came out of Li Yundong's mouth, like an invisible air cannon, and hit LV Fengping's face heavily. Her body shook violently, and her mind went blank in an instant. Following that, the lion seal came right after, hitting her squarely in the chest, causing her to lose control of her body and fly backward. At this time, Li Yundong raised his hand and accurately grabbed the fast-spinning fan of 7 treasures without looking. He turned around and waved the iron fan with its leaves open. Like waving a huge machete, he slashed at LV Fengping from head to toe. When the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures rotated at high speed, it was really like a chainsaw. With a muffled sound, LV Fengping was instantly split in half by Li Yundong's fan. LV Fengping's body was destroyed, and a ghost that looked exactly like her quickly flew out of her body. She screamed in fear and roared angrily, flying to a height of more than 20 meters like lightning. LV Fengping hovered high in the sky and shouted with resentment, "Impossible. You are just a young boy who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can you be so powerful? Who the hell are you? Tell me your name if you have the ability." Her expression was full of resentment, as if she couldn't wait to rush down and crazily bite Li Yundong's body. However, she was afraid of Li Yundong's amazing Yuanyang Qi, so she only dared to roar 20 meters away, not daring to take half a step forward. LV Fengping knew very well that with the strength and concentration of Yuanyang Qi that Li Yundong had shown just now, as long as she got a little closer, she would be scared out of her wits with a loud roar. Like Wu Hao, all her cultivation in this life would be in vain. Although it was the first time that Li Yundong had seen a ghost swimming out of a dead person's body, and it was the first time that he had been threatened by such a legendary ghost, the yang qi in his body was extremely strong. How could he be afraid of these demons and ghosts with threatening yin qi? Li Yundong snorted coldly and slammed the fan of 7 treasures in his hand heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble slightly. He pointed at LV Fengping who was hovering in the air and shouted, "A man never changes his name. Today I, Li Yundong, will kill you shameless people. Don't forget my name in your next life. I'll be waiting for you." LV Fengping gritted her teeth and roared, "Li Yundong? Li Yundong. Well, I'll remember your name. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear I won't give up." Li Yundong was furious. He only hated that he couldn't fly and could only watch an enemy escape. He shouted, "I wasn't afraid of you when you were alive. Do you think I'm afraid of a lonely ghost like you now? Get lost." This roar almost shattered the ghost of LV Fengping, who was 20 meters away. LV Fengping was so shocked that she retreated another 20 meters. She gave Li Yundong a hateful look and finally turned to leave. When LV Fengping left, she unwillingly released a ghost technique. In an instant, the air was filled with her resentful cries, curses and sad cries. For a moment, the cold wind was blowing around, and the world was gloomy, which made people's hair stand on end. Although Dorji Tenzin was a warrior monk, he had not cultivated Niden after all. For a moment, he couldn't help but shiver when he was pierced by the cold wind. However, Li Yundong sneered and waved the fan of 7 treasures in his hand. With a whoosh, he blew away the cold wind around him and shouted, "Disperse." In the blink of an eye, the shouts, cries and gusts of cold wind around him suddenly disappeared, and the hazy world became clear again. Li Yundong stood with his fan like a god. From the absolute disadvantage of fighting 1 against 3, he resolved the situation in the blink of an eye. He fought against many and defeated many. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. It could be said that the hare rose and the falcon fell, and the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Although Dorji Tenzin was among them, the moment he was sent flying he suddenly understood that he had become an accomplice of Wu Hao and the others. If Li Yundong hadn't blown him away, he would have been burned to ashes like Wu Hao. Dorji Tenzin was shocked by Li Yundong's tyranny and ashamed of his inability to distinguish between good and evil. He sat cross-legged on the ground, put his palms together, recited a few scriptures, and then said in a deep voice, "If you want to kill me, just kill me. I will never complain." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.